This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate what if Naruto traveled back in time and erased Konan, Nagato, and Yahiko. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting our time, let's start the story.
He felt exhausted in every way, spiritually, physically, and really. He experienced the rush of being hurled quickly somewhere. Several spots on him experienced burning and stinging sensations as he felt the pain pulses travel up his body. He was aware that he had stopped. Opening his eyes to look around him was a seemingly easy goal, but it was a huge one. The eyes of Naruto flitted open. Like hesitant, excruciatingly slow door openings. He became aware that he was completely soaked at that point. He had been drenched in rain. Unless it was pouring rain, it was clear that he had been lying down in the mud for hours. Exhausted. That's how he felt. He raised his head to examine his body, but it took too much effort to do so for more than a few seconds. He just stared at the sky, which was bright and gray with a few golden rays peeking through. This jutsu was dangerous, too unpredictable, he had been told. He could lose his life in an attempt. No matter how pathetic the chance was, it was worth it anyway. He didn't really have anything to give back. Killer B must be in a similar state somewhere nearby because he also took that chance. He believed he could only move in basic, undemanding ways. His fingers and toes twitched, or his arms or legs moved for a split second. He had never felt so worn out in his life. Nothing even approached the weariness he was experiencing right now. There was no way he could rest when he heard the patter of rain hitting his forehead. But would he die if he dozed off? It could be, but he didn't give a damn. Despite drifting in and out of unconsciousness, he would never be completely aware of it. A fierce struggle of wills started to take root inside of him. To simply remain motionless and endure forgetfulness, or battle with almost all of his remaining strength. The idea of one of them seemed so wonderful. He kept the thought in his mind. He was more exhausted than ever from all this contemplation. He argued over whether anything else was real while in a dreamlike state. Act is a single word that is continuously formed. Take action. Only the thunderous roars in the simmering skies above could be heard. Kurama, Kurama. The gloomy sky changed. For some reason, the overall grayness turned into a red, tinted steel ceiling. The yellow rays transformed into the corroded pipes that extended along the wall's sides. The fact that he was inside the enormous fox's seal was not immediately apparent. Even he felt exhausted on the inside while he was still lying in the water. The enormous gate remained open, demonstrating their implicit trust in one another. He crept over to the gate, until the dim interior was dimly lit for him. Even he knew that the arrogant Nine Tails himself was depleted of chakra when he saw Kurama lying inside. They were breathing loudly and deeply, as if they were asleep. However, there was no response when he called out. He extended a hand. Just a little chakra. Enough for me to get somewhere. He expressed uncertainty about whether he actually took it or if Kurama had given it to him. Nevertheless, he sensed that he was absorbing the tiny chakra source. A source of pleasure gathered within him. He felt a little relief from the energy source. He was shivering and cold from spending so much time in the rain and gravel. His surroundings were only dimly lit, and the sky appeared to be darker than before. He saw a tiny crawl space next to a rock wall where he might temporarily recuperate. He weakly reflected after absorbing natural energy and needed chakra. He chose not to, though, because he believed that the more potent unstable source would overwhelm his meager chakra. When he tried to move his limbs, he discovered that they were more cooperative than before. Apart from the general heaviness, he did not feel any different or have any missing limbs. The only thing he could think about was the mystery of why he felt so empty. By now, he ought to have recovered some chakra. Maybe Kurama's absence contributed to this. If his mother was so sure of it, then even his Uzumaki genes ought to have been helpful. He made an attempt to stand, but it was impossible. Come on. You faced harder stuff before. But he knew it was a valuable waste of his energy, and he couldn't. However, there was a chance that they would crawl. He vowed to dry up and heal, to crawl slowly toward a secure heaven. Hands were placed one after the other. He was digging into crackling gravel with his feet and knees. When he arrived at the tiny crawl space, he didn't care how much time had gone by. It was barely big enough to fit him in his backpack. But the little hole in the wall was dry. Weary, he tossed aside his sopping wet clothes and opened his pack to discover a variety of supplies for various uses. In order to create a fire that would last for an hour and provide some warmth, he took out a thermal blanket and a specially coated stick. Even though he was exhausted, he made himself eat some of the food he had brought. After he was done, he committed himself to sleeping. There were times when he would wake up in complete darkness, with nothing visible. He was reassured that he had not died, though, by the sounds of the rain falling. Sometimes there would be light, and he would keep eating whatever food he could find to get stronger. He wasn't sure if it was days or hours that went by. All he could tell was that he slept a great deal. He still experienced that constant fatigue every morning. Like the rain, which showed no signs of abating, it didn't help him pass the time, even though it might have stopped and then resumed during his sleep. He became less delirious each time he woke up. It became clear to him that he was by himself because he could not see his companion. "Oh no, Octopops, where are you?" Finally, Kurama woke up from his sleep. Naruto. He found himself once more inside the walls he knew. A giant nine-tailed fox was one of his last friends. The exhausted Naruto thought, "Hey, you're awake." He was seated inside the seal and gazing at Kurama. It yawned enormously, exposing its teeth in the process. How long? It extended its limbs, but it remained motionless. He had no idea how to respond to that. "Fuck if I know, I've been waking and passing out, it could have been days or hours." Kurama's deep, commanding voice echoed in the air as he appeared confused. "You've got hardly any chakra. The same could be said of myself. How much do you think?" "It might have been 2 days, at the very least," replied he. If it hadn't affected him as well, it was almost amusing to hear the wounded pride in his voice when he said, "If it's been that long we should have been back to full power." "I know, it's like, I don't know, my chakra recovery had been disrupted. But we're still getting some of it back, more slowly maybe. I was so exhausted I probably would have died if I didn't take some of your chakra to get inside here." He was silent at the time, and Kurama appeared to have an answer to a question he had been dying to ask. It roared loudly after a moment of silence. It better have fucking worked. The thought of, "I hope so too," troubled him. He still experienced the chakra exhaustion, even if it had only been a few days since his arrival. He seemed to have overworked himself to the point of simply fainting. The difference was that, whereas a day of rest would normally suffice, he continued to feel it days later. "You said it would painless, it wasn't that at all." Kurama repeated, "I said dying would have been painless. The jutsu required colossal amounts of chakra, we also heavily distorted time and space. Those are some possible factors with some consequences. It could have taken some of your vitality and with the space and time disrupted our chakra regeneration. Theories obviously. What's expected with lower vitality is shortened age expectancy and stamina." "Oh. Well that sucks," was his only possible response. He pondered this information for a long time without saying anything. The more he considered his situation, the more amusing it seemed. He laughed once out of relief, and many times out of a variety of emotions. It turned into a full-fledged giggle. A deep, throaty laugh that borders on madness. It went on until his chest ached and breathing became challenging. Before Kurama broke the silence, he began to pant. "I think it might have fucked up your mind too, kid." No. Hey, I'm fine. Just glad," he said, turning to face the rain as it pounded the ground. He let out a deep sigh. His mind was filled with flashbacks to those earlier days. He had set out on a mission for himself, and now he needed to be sure he would finish it. "Even after that, there's nothing that will stop me. If it's true then I'll just adapt to it. You know what, Kurama, thank you. There's nothing I can do to appreciate what you helped accomplish." "Shut up, idiot," Kurama said, twitching his ear as he looked at him. He could still hear the welcome and appreciation in his voice. Kurama also hated the world where genjutsu was used. It didn't sit well with either of them. When Obito broke Kurama out at birth, the plan was to stop him before he revealed himself. The day was coming to an end as it started to grow darker. "We'll go when it gets brighter out." He didn't receive a response, but it held no significance. Before he could get any more rest, he needed to determine a precise date. How long he still had to wait. When he opened his eyes, he discovered that daylight had arrived. He had to force himself to get up because he had made a promise to himself. The war had decimated his black and orange jacket to nothing. He therefore wore a red jacket with a hood and sleeves with a thick orange stripe. Because it had a hood, which provided shelter from the seemingly never-ending rain, he was fortunate to have taken it from an empty store. He rummaged through his bag and discovered that almost all of the food he had packed for the week was gone. It could have been a sign of how much he ate or how much he slept. He had some of the ramen he brought for breakfast, but that wasn't counting that. He still felt tired and tender as he left. He saw some footprints from his landing spot. The marks of the multiple places he had fallen and skipped across from his initial landing were visible to him. He discovered a road close by and made the decision to set out in a random direction. "Where's Octopops?" "Perhaps you wouldn't be here yet, still in your mother's womb, back where he was at this time." He shivered and concentrated on walking, saying, "I don't want to hear about that. We'll have to meet up with him eventually somehow." His anxiety increased with the amount of time he observed. The weather and the terrain both indicated that he was far from the land of fire. He was unable to identify any kind of surroundings because it was all too strange. He ended up nowhere close to the Leaf Village, it became clear, particularly after he noticed a sign directing him to a town he was unfamiliar with. He massaged the back of his neck, wondering how long it would be until Obito appeared. In search of any clue as to his location, he continued toward the town's location. Overhead, he heard thunder rumbling once more, but strangely, it didn't sound like thunder at all. He concentrated on the sound, its strange length and erratic nature. When he realized that the distant explosions he heard were beyond, his anxiety increased. He accelerated from slow steps to a jog. The sooner he arrived in the town and discovered his location, the better. In the middle of the road, he saw a fight breaking out between two people. A more massive figure with a smaller one. He ran as quickly as he could in the direction of the two. He watched the rain slide by. "No, it's mine." A girl's cries were heard. She fell to the ground after the bigger one gave her a vicious kick to the stomach. Clinging desperately to the fallen pack, he ransacked it. "Get the hell away from her," Naruto yelled as he hurled a tiny stone at the figure, striking him in the head. He was shouting profanities when he was knocked over. He got back up and stared at the direction the stone had been thrown while gripping his skull. Naruto prepared for battle by putting himself in a stance. The man suddenly flinched and fled, throwing the pack aside in his panic. Feeling almost a little exhausted from the running and sprinting, he inhaled deeply. He would probably be exhausted from a battle with another shinobi. He walked past the whimpering girl to retrieve the pack, certain that the person would not come back. He discovered a half-full water bottle, some empty wrappers, and nothing else of interest in the pack. After closing it, he went back to the girl and let her drop it. She covered her face with a big dark blue hood. Softly, "Are you all right?" he inquired. She didn't try to talk, so the rain was the only thing to fill the silence. "Yes," was said so softly that he nearly missed it. He knelt down and demonstrated his point by shaking his bag in front of her. "Good, I got your bag back." She just sat in the mud, not even trying to reach for it. Wondering what to do, he rubbed the back of his neck. Making sure she was safe before he left was the right thing to do. Ramen, if anything, was what made him feel better most of the time. He hadn't eaten in a long time, and the girl might be aware of the exact date. It would undoubtedly cut down on time, as the town was still quite a distance away. He brought up 2 cups of ramen and held one out for her to see. "Hey, do you want to give some hot ramen?" he asked. Having decided not to come out. "That always makes my day, might just be me though." There had been a gasp, and a momentary flash of her blue hair. He frowned when he heard the fear and excitement in her voice as she hesitated before reaching out to grab it. Are you sure?" she asked. He questioned incredulously, "Of course. Why wouldn't I?" However, he was still instructed to eat the ramen with hot water. "Come on, let's get out of the rain and eat this." He looked around and located the closest tree that would protect them from the rain. It was sufficiently near the road. He lit a small fire to boil the water, but she remained where she was. She looked in his direction. He said, "Aren't ya coming?" And she picked up her bag before heading out. He carried a metal canteen bottle, which he heated until it boiled. All of his equipment was designed to be used for camping and hiding away until the right moment. He had some Ryo to refuel them as well, until the 10th of October. While they waited for the water to boil, she sat on the other side of him. The two fell into another tense silence. "What's your name?" "Mine's Naruto." "Konan," was her response. Nagato's comrade was a name he was familiar with. He assumed it was a coincidence. He asked another question because she didn't seem to be very talkative either. "So where are your parents?" She said solemnly, "They're gone." Before he could ask another question, she added in a whisper, "I'm alone." Kurama said, "She's an orphan like you." An eerie sense of impending doom began to descend upon him. The clues and things he witnessed that didn't happen during his lifetime. Robbing children? Explosions at random? Orphans? What is this? When the water eventually ran out, he filled their ramen cups shakily. He hesitated before posing his next query. Kurama's sardonic response, "Seems like war to me," which was not well received. More to Kurama than to Konan, he asked out loud, "War?" And she nodded her head in agreement. Another strained silence, longer. In a terrified tone, he asked, "Do you know the date?" He decided not to believe her when she mumbled it. However, everything suggested otherwise. This was only verified when Konan drew back her hood to show her face. Her features were less prominent and less mature than those of her older counterpart, but he could have recognized her anywhere. They could not be mistaken for one another. She had short blue hair and amber, clear eyes. Her question was, "Are you okay?" His stomach fell. and he started breathing rapidly and raggedly. His vision darkened and blurred. He experienced his own panic and despair. Everything was racing through his mind too quickly for him to manage. He muttered something he wasn't entirely sure of. He was familiar with this sensation, having experienced it previously. Hearing Kurama yelling loudly, "Naruto, you need to calm down," he hardly noticed. They were far too far gone. It wasn't even close to the years before his due date. He was still in a panic. It resembled his last mistake. "You moron, we can still accomplish everything we set out to do." His words made a small difference, but his mind was still racing with absurd ideas. He tried to fight it, fighting it with deep breaths. Like a mantra, he said, "We can still do it, we can." His heart continued to race, and he was once more worn out. Now he wanted nothing more than to sleep. "Now that your pitiful human emotions calmed down, you should follow that girl. The one with Rinnegan will eventually show up. We will change things eventually if we do." He was grateful for Kurama's advice because he was having trouble thinking clearly. "Okay, I got it. Like everything will never happen, right?" It was unclear whether he cared or not, but time had undoubtedly passed. He had just sat down on the grass and listened to whatever noises were coming. Like Konan munching on her second cup of ramen, the droplets striking the ground, or the velvety clap of thunder. She devoured the noodles wholeheartedly. If it hadn't been so clear that she was starving, he might have been pleased. She appeared to be quite happy stuffing her face with food. Once more, he looked up at the sky, and the tree was powerless to stop the occasional drop that fell on his face. He and Kurama had discussed a wide range of topics. The time-traveling technique is extremely inaccurate, and it requires a lot of chakra, so using it again would probably make their predicament worse. Considering Killer Bee's absence and the ongoing conflict, the Eight Tails container probably wasn't even close to his village. He inquired, "So Konan, how old are you? 13? It was somewhat unexpected. "Geez, when I was her age, were we that little?" He clearly recalled that prior to traveling with the perverted sage, he was among the shortest. "Oh, well, I'm 17, well, very recently too." "That's nice, you're practically grown up, huh?" she responded. As he finished the last of the ramen she was holding, he turned to face her. "I guess, but you're older than your age, right?" She ignored his question and continued to stare down at her soup. He was right, but even his fourth Shinobi battle made him feel much older than he actually was. He was a participant, and he would never forget some of what he had seen. He was a Shinobi, but based on his limited knowledge, Konan and the others were just regular people, an orphan during the conflict. When he eventually sat up, he said, "Do you want some juice and another cup of ramen?" She gave a small smile. A little strange. The Konan he knew was much more somber, with even more suffering and loss. She would never have smiled at him. He heated up more water for Konan's favorite food, ramen, and the last box of juice. She said with a smile, "It's been so long since I ate this much juice too. I could never get this." He was nearly taken aback by Nagato's description of their circumstances. The lack of food, the orphans, and all the deaths. Seeing it with my own eyes was different. He only ate to fill his belly. The rain had finally subsided in its intensity when he asked, "So Konan, were you heading towards that town?" The only rain the land of rain could produce was a light misty drizzle. "I was her hesitant response. He turned to face the town and said, "How about we go together? Two is always better than one." Telling people he was from the future would draw unwanted attention, so he figured he had to lie. If anyone would have taken him seriously. The question seemed to baffle her. "We just met?" He glanced around awkwardly and said, "Sure we did. We're both orphans, so we already understand each other a bit. I mean, I have this dream I want to fulfill. It took a big back step, and I have a small idea on where to start. You see, I want the world to live in peace. I'll do whatever in my power to accomplish that ideal, but I really can't do it alone. So I'll need comrades, people I can trust and help me." Her expression was strange. "You want to create peace? No fighting?" she asked. "Definitely, I'm no moron. Hopefully," he said, ignoring Kurama's comment. "Doing things on my own will be impossible," she said. "Why are you asking me?" Not much of a feeling if he knew about it. "Well, to start, I have this good feeling about you. I think you'd be a really skilled kunoichi." Some people who had seen her had told him about her skill. She belonged to the Akatsuki as well. "So Konan, would you like to learn how to become a kunoichi, to fight and defend yourself? To join me in trying bring peace and understanding to this world?" She appeared ashamed of herself as she said, "I'm thankful for what you did, really. I have nothing against you, it's just I'd much rather not trust every person I meet. Even though I just did accept your food." "How desperate you are. Smart, cautious, and most likely more so than you were after hearing Kurama's comment. That's exactly what I mean, you're smart, it's how you survive. Hell, I got lucky I got someone to teach me how to fight. I'm extending the same courtesy the old man gave me. She said, you want to teach me how to fight? Yeah, even if you don't want to help me find cooperation between everyone, that's okay too. You can go whenever you like. She was thinking deeply. I know it's very silly to ask, but can you promise me that you'll stop all this fighting? That's my word, I can never allow myself to back out on it. I know you don't trust me just yet, but I sincerely hope we can be friends eventually. Friends always have each other's back, he said with a smile. She looked at it for a long time. I guess, there always have to be some sort of trust, even in yourself to get something done right? He grinned. Well, then, how about we get going towards the town then? As he strolled through the town, Naruto glanced around. Not many people were passing through the market. The town likely had several thousand residents and was of a moderate size. Many of the buildings in Aim's towns were several stories high, suggesting that they liked to make them small. He rummaged through his bag, which he had packed with food and Konan's as well. He placed the remaining funds in his personal frog wallet. We'll have this money for a little while. He considered how he might be able to get more food in the future. A shopkeeper ejected an orphan from the store, suggesting that no one was hiring or seeking assistance. It was the last place to try to earn money, the orphan had complained. It appeared as though other stores were closing due to a lack of business or relocating to a safer area. He wanted to assist, but Kurama told him to keep quiet because they would eventually find themselves in that situation as well. When they ran out, they would have to steal. He gave Konan the other half of a popsicle and ate the other half. The cost of purchasing it was a little high. She said with a smile, I don't remember how sweets tasted like. He surveyed the town, which was in rather poor condition. When the war first arrived, the number of homeless people, refugees, and orphans was astounding. They appeared to have camped out on the outskirts of the city. Once they were in the market district, it was considerably less so. He cursed his own indolence for not paying attention in the academy and only really paying attention to his father's exploits, which only occurred in the Third Shinobi War. The Fourth War was much different than this. He remembered Nagato stating that Aim was at the epicenter of the three warring nations and that the war was being fought solely for financial gain and territorial expansion. A few Aim shinobi walked by, looking anxious and restless as they swiftly scanned their surroundings. Knowing that he had the secret leaf headband in his own pack caused him to feel uneasy. It was a priceless present from Iruka that he would never part with. The metal band held sentimental value even though the original cloth was destroyed. All right, he said, find Yahiko and Nagato and then the perverted sage, then. He figured he could deal with that when he reached that point. In addition, he had purchased a tiny tent for Konan, which was kept inside a ceiling scroll. He yawned. The orange in the distance indicated that dusk was approaching. He was almost out of town with Konan. He saw a lot of refugees camped out along the village's outer walls and beggars. When he noticed the distant tree line, he came to a stop. A chill went up his spine as he stood right outside the gates. He heard only his own breathing, and the sound of a toddler's sobbing ceased. He was unable to hear Konan's question. Abruptly, he glanced toward the tree line and saw a number of Aim shinobi watching over the refugees. He heard the leaves piercing and the branches being swept away. Many of them were straight and had a specific goal in mind. A barrage of ninja and kunai weapons sliced through the forest's underbrush. He saw the scraps of paper trailing behind them. Hissing violently, the shinobi jumped out of the trees and began to move. Around him, a great number of innocent people were on the verge of being caught in the middle. He acted instinctively to protect them without giving it any thought. He felt the power surge within him as he invoked his companion's chakra. When he spread his arms, bigger, more expansive limbs materialized, catching the thrown kunai. Recalling the diminutive and unskilled Konan, he turned to her and yelled for her to run. She flinched from the violent explosions, her eyes wide open, and he felt the tremors run through his bones. The air was filled with muffled screams, and people started to run for their lives. Rushing through the existing gate. Before he focused on the trees, he noticed Konan starting to follow the crowd. As a shinobi approached him, he cut off the connection to Kurama's chakra. A slash was attempted, and he dodged. He flew back in the ranks of the attacking forces after Naruto kicked him in the ribs. 3 others took his place and confronted him. When he saw their headbands, he turned pale. Their steel plates are engraved with the leaf symbol. In self-defense, he quickly and deftly sidestepped a blow before striking his assailant in the face with an elbow. He kicked sweepingly and tripped another one. He caught a fist aimed at him on his own knee and was soon enmeshed in a struggle. He kneed him in the stomach to free himself. A jet of water threw him away before he could do anything else. He rolled on the hard concrete road after catching himself in midair, then quickly used his momentum to get off to a running start. As he ran off, he shook his vertigo away. He glanced over his shoulder at some leaf shinobi attempting to intercept. Even though the meager number of guards was already overpowered, more aimed shinobi arrived to assist. The reinforcements stopped his pursuers. He ran, gaining a respectable pace as he went past terrified bystanders attempting to get away from the impending conflict over the town. Naruto heard numerous explosions all around him and frantically looked for Konan. A few leaf shinobi had already crept in, fought, and wreaked havoc all around them. He was concerned about her well-being. Adrenaline rushed through his veins, causing his blood to flow rapidly. He had already witnessed a number of people lying still on the streets, explosions reverberating throughout his immediate vicinity, and debris plummeting from above as it struck numerous innocent people. He witnessed the shinobi's leaping forms soaring over building roofs. The chaos was exacerbated by the sound of an alarm blaring through speakers that hung around the streets. When an explosion sent debris flying across the street, he covered his face. Both children and villagers screamed in fear as they fled the fighting, only to find more ninja fighting among themselves. A building started to lean vicariously as he heard a roar that was crackling and collapsing. Near the leaning concrete frame, the crowd started to thin out, and a few people stumbled and fell. As it fell, the building cast a shadow over them. In order to save them, he hurried forward and made shadow clones. He quickly seized one of the fallen individuals. He narrowly avoided the powerful crash while clinging to an elderly man. As he ran out of it, he could hardly see because of the dust storm it created. After helping the elderly man stand, Naruto sensed the return of his shadow clone's memories. He tried to find Konan again without waiting for the old man to thank him because the others were safe. Before he saw her, he was racing through a number of streets. Someone her height beckoned to her from an alleyway as she was getting up off the ground. He arrived in a flash and picked her up. She turned to the other child, startled to see him. The street they were on was already clearing when he yelled, "Come on, I know a good way out of the village. Hurry, before someone spots us." At least his face was familiar to him. Someone he was trying to find who had, in theory, been in combat once. "Let's go, Konan," he said, guiding her to Yahiko, the boy he knew. The boy with the orange hair clarified, "Yes, it's a sewer, but we should be able to escape safely through here." Through the darkness, he led the way with a tiny flashlight. In the tunnels, he heard voices echoing. "Don't worry, those are some people that I helped earlier. It's like a maze down here, so I made some signs that pointed the way out," pointing to a situation. "I was bored a lot so." Kurama remarked, "Hey, these kids are smart, no wonder they survived." Above him, Naruto heard vibrations. He was accompanied by two younger ones who subtly displayed their nervousness. They were constantly scanning the smallest sound and breathing shallowly. His senses were alert for any possible assailants. They trudged slowly through the pathways and muck. He certainly did not touch the walls or anything else. "Where's your pack, Naruto?" "Huh?" he asked, lifting his shoulders to discover that the weight he was carrying had vanished. "Damn it, that had nearly everything we had," he said, turning pale as he realized he had lost it. Anger made him clench his fists. As they strolled, he muttered a few more curses. "I must have lost it." He didn't have to wait long to hear the raindrops hitting the sewer they were in. "This is it." An arrow pointed upward as they came to a halt. Beside it was a ladder that led to the gray sky above. He leapt to his feet, landed outside, and looked around. It's just a field of grass with a few pairs of footprints going in an unknown direction. From the direction of the town, there was a noticeable silence. There was no doubt that the battle was over. He waited above, listening to the clinking of the ladder in use. He and Yahiko himself assisted Konan out of the tube. "Thanks," he said, his hands still clenched. He greeted him with a smile and a handshake. "Name's Yahiko." He was about Konan's age, shorter, and wore a big gray overcoat to keep the weather out. He carried a backpack with him. "Naruto," he said, shaking his hand as well. He nodded, and Yahiko led the way to the closest road. "Let's get the hell away from here before we do anything else, right?" he said. Naruto woke up from his sleep. He examined Konan's and Yahiko's sleeping bodies. It was strange to be around some of the Akatsuki's future founders. Somewhere in AIM, another founder is still active. I didn't anticipate meeting both of them on the same day. If only I had my pack now. Since they wished to maintain a low profile, there was no fire. Since they had left the sewer, they had not spoken. The two children had experienced shock, fear, and exhaustion. He slept for a while, but he planned to wake up later. He stretched his muscles as he crawled out of the cave he was in. He reflected on what had transpired in the village. which had been comparatively tranquil before complete chaos struck. It was terrible, said the many innocent onlookers who were hit. He thought back to the times when the 10 Tails Wood style attack killed Neji and other shinobi within his line of sight. Witnessing defenseless civilians killed by ninja was a completely different experience. They were harmless, he said, turning to face the other sleeping orphans. They grew up in this environment, in the midst of war. Seeing his fellow village shinobi murder innocent people disturbed him, intentionally or by accident. He inhaled deeply. It was probably too soon to assume that his chakra was malfunctioning. I was hoping that in a few days, it would at least return to normal. If only he knew how long it had been since his arrival. For now, he concentrated on going back to get his bag. He needed valuables and other items to help him in the future. He hadn't had time to heal, and the clones he made to aid the civilians kind of stopped him, so his chakra was still pretty weak. All he could do was retrieve that bag. Now he would not be deterred by his tiredness. With some shelter from the rain, he sat outside. He just sat there and thought. He felt a drop in his chakra and reluctantly created a shadow clone. It was so obviously invisible before. After that, he realized he needed to work harder at forming a Rasengan. Even that required some effort, so he took a deep breath and tried to shape some chakra. He sincerely hoped it was only temporary. So I sort of have this disability, huh? He asked. Anything can have consequences, no matter how mundane, great or terrible, Kurama commented. Since when have you become such a philosopher? Since I became your brain, I think I should avoid trying to use sage mode for the time being, until I at least fully recover, he said with a worried expression. Naruto, Kurama yelled, his tone once more solemn. Take into account of the worst case scenario that you'll never return to normal, that'll you'll get more exhausted easily. I'm in a similar state with my chakra too, so I can't let my chakra flow so abundantly into you anymore. The thought of, all right, was unsettling. He hoped that the statement, a sacrifice for a great accomplishment, was untrue. If he didn't have to contribute anything at all, everything would be so much better. He wasn't expecting it. It's been a really long day. He was a little frustrated by everything. His precious energy needed for today would be depleted even if he were to destroy a nearby tree. That infuriated him even more. He had sentimental value in some of the things in his bag. He wasn't going to lose it right away after returning. But he was a person of action, and he always took action when he had had enough. He covered his face with a long piece of cloth to conceal who he was. He got up and began walking back to the captured town, flipping his hood over his head. To reach the town, he ran through slick trees and damp ground. As he got closer, he could see the town's glow in the skyline. He has not yet spotted any patrols. He slowed as he saw the buildings in the distance. It would be insane if I just walked in like I owned the place. At least more than usual, the fox remarked. Additionally, he wasn't convinced that harming his fellow villagers was a good idea. He might have had an easier time infiltrating it if he had his leaf band. He wouldn't be able to make hundreds of shadow clones right now due to his pitifully low chakra. Yahiko had shown him the sewers, and he could have sneaked back inside. However, it appeared more likely that any entrances would have been covered with traps or sealed. At least if they demonstrated some level of competency. A more direct approach was therefore the only optimal strategy. He went around the town in search of the weakest point to enter, ensuring that no minor patrols are conducted in the village. He quickly located the least populated area, which wasn't much in comparison to the other possibilities, but it had to do. Kurama remarked, it would be wise if there were traps positioned everywhere. He stood at the edge of a large field with tall grass, rain gently drifting to the ground like falling mist, and said, yeah, good call. The sun had set a little over 2 hours prior, and the moonlight barely illuminated the landscape as it filtered through the gaps in the clouds. The approaching town was the only practical source of light. There was a sense of melancholy about the building's lack of color and the continuous rain. In the hopes that no Byakugan users were watching over it, he moved slowly through the tall grass. He shook away the slight pause it caused him. This isn't the moment. Many traps were set up to warn of any potential intruders that Naruto might have missed. The trip was taking a long time. Despite the fact that the town was only a couple hundred meters away, he was becoming frustrated with the slow crawl, but during his senjutsu training, he discovered that feeling the energy of nature helped him relax. If his chakra had been disturbed, he would not have dared to attempt to gather any of it. He finally reached the town's edge after an hour of dodging curious patrols and traps. As he jumped up to the closest building, a few shinobi went about their rounds, hiding in the building between some crevices. Among the flat roofs of the towns were dozens of leaf ninja. He saw the completion of house raids and the capture of captives at the closest street. Do you think I should help them? Several civilians were crying as they watched several being flung to the ground, holding on to their loved ones and children. You'll only make it worse. How so? Will you be able to care for them, protect them at all times? Or to let them fend for themselves? Even if you decide to rescue them, will they even be able to outrun the shinobi? Even so, it was a viewpoint he hadn't given much thought to. Alright geez, just a yes or no would have been okay. As he proceeded in the direction where he had first misplaced his bag, it caused him to reflect. He had been said to be able to influence others to follow him, to begin to trust him because of his character. He wanted to be Hokage, but he had to do more research, to begin considering the ramifications of his behavior. It's going to be some hard work. There were many Konoha shinobi on patrol, some of whom were probably celebrating their win because he could hear them shouting with excitement, while others were on rooftops, keeping a languid eye on the streets. Nor had he been apprehended yet. There don't appear to be any Hyugas. At last, he arrived at the doorway where his bag had gone missing. The street was rather crowded, with shinobi coming in while carrying bags. Although he stayed in the shadows, he saw that many shinobi had coal eyes and raven hair. The way they carried themselves in particular made him think of Sasuke. A proud and self-assured pace. Kurama said, Uchiha are not an impossibility. He remembered that Obito had told him about the Uchiha's fate. Their curse was undoubtedly a lot of nonsense. He was not at all comfortable with anything that was predetermined, fateful, or related to destiny. If he could make one positive change, it would be to help them avoid being killed for attempting to rebel against the village. He scowled and said, it's not like they've done it yet. He searched from above, taking care to avoid their line of sight. Unfortunately, he couldn't find any evidence of it, either taken or hidden beneath one of the many rubble piles. I saw my headband inside. Perhaps they took it somewhere. They must have some sort of lost and found tent. A densely populated area may contain one. He trailed a group closely until they arrived at a sizable camp. He remembered it as a farmer's market where he had stopped to buy some food, a place with no buildings. He estimated that it held at least 200 shinobi, and there were many tents. That's a lot of people I don't want to hurt, too badly at least. The grounds were a jumble of people moving about and erecting their own tents. He observed shinobi coming and going from a number of buildings that surrounded the location. That ought to be in one of those. The issue was that there were too many people around to enter covertly. He would also be noticed by the numerous guards above the buildings. Shadow clones for a distraction then. To replicate himself outside of town, he made a number of shadow clones. After waiting for a full 30 minutes, he began to feel some of his memories blending together. In 2 minutes, there will be at least 30 strong clones to provide a distraction. He left the side of the building he was on and made his way swiftly and stealthily to the top. The other flat roofs were mostly under the watchful eye of a Chunin guard. Recalling some of the training Jiraiya had given him, he stealthily approached him from behind. He started to struggle frantically as he reached for his neck. Only labored gasps came out of the Chunin's attempts to yell for assistance. Only a few seconds later, he went unconscious. He checked his breathing and found it to be stable, so he said, he should be out for a few minutes. In order to enter quickly and covertly, he created more shadow clones to eliminate a few more lookouts in the area. It took a lot of energy for him to find himself trying to breathe normally. He could hear the distant, muted booms and the flares near the village entrance. Shinobi emerged from their tents as the excitement below increased. Orders were shouted to their subordinates by Jonin. As the horde of ninja moved toward the disturbance, the courtyard swiftly descended into chaos. He correctly believed that defenses weren't too weak in case the attack was a distraction, and smaller squads swiftly scattered towards various walls. With a graceful landing on the hard concrete, he quickly headed for the tangle of buildings. He went into one building and saw bags lined up beneath tables and a jumble of things spread out over them. A voice behind him yelled, "Halt!" Before he could move forward. Instead of listening, he turned to face a straggler. He said humbly, "You dare attack Konoha territory?" The bold black eyes and the raven hair. Naruto noticed that he was dressed similarly to Sasuke, with a high collar. He noticed that the jacket was embroidered with the Uchiha's symbol. His next remarks were patronizing. "You're infiltrating, stops here." Naruto asked, "An Uchiha, right? Think you need your Sharingan to stop me?" "It will take less than 10 seconds, he said with assurance. From Naruto's perspective, arrogant. All he could do was blink at him foolishly. He saw his clone approach him from behind and say, Thanks." A moment later he was unconscious on the floor. Gazing at the drooling mess that was the Uchiha, he asked himself, "Wonder if they are all like that bastard Sasuke." Naruto remarked, but he was too easy. He questioned whether that was the case for all Uchiha. At least Sasuke could support his assertions. Yup. Did he truly speak to himself? Along with the other buildings in the area, He made more shadow clones to aid in his search. He was exhausted from the effort of the day by that point. To find his bag, he flipped the place upside down. He had to fight his way out every second he crawled because they would soon realize his trick. Even that would be challenging in his current condition. His clones failed to spot his pack, and memories flooded into him, even after a second, more exhaustive search. He let out a frustrated, "Ah, shit," scream. He required additional supplies for Yahiko, Konan, and himself. He scrambled for more supplies as fast as he could. When he was done, he felt all his clones fade away. He couldn't find his belongings in time. At least his tool bag contained a copy of Jiraiya's book, his father's kunai, and Sasuke's headband. Too many, but he also valued Iruka's headband. He ran across the rooftops, climbed to the top of the building, and sprinted out the door. The majority of the rooftops were deserted. They were probably removed to support the walls outside the town. Large, heavy droplets replaced the mist's gentle descent. He was getting closer to the exit when he noticed a second form appear on the other side of the roof. With a frustrated sigh, he skidded to a stop. She was petite, thin, and slender. Akunoichi confronted him. She wore a katana that hung behind her waist, black pants that fit snugly, a Chunin flak jacket, and Konohahita.8 in its proper place. She had medium length wet black hair that was tied in a high ponytail that reached her neck, and she had fair skin. Her long bangs hung on the side of her face, partially hiding her Hide.8 and hovering just above her nose and onyx eyes. Observing her resolute black eyes and wet heart-shaped face, her confident voice said, "You're not going anywhere." A voice Naruto thought was beautiful. This isn't the place to think about girls. Fortunately, the clothing he was wearing covered up the heat in his cheeks. When he saw the swirl of the Sharingan in her eyes, his opinion of her improved significantly. She's not underestimating me, at least. Maybe not every Uchiha was so conceited. She silently withdrew her katana from its sheath. Ignoring her team's teasing, Makoto Uchiha was on her way back from a scouting run outside the fields. She just wanted to sleep, but the rain kept coming down from the sky. She took great pride in her clan as a Uchiha. Being best friends with a boisterous and brazen redhead had prevented her from boasting about it, so she made an exception. Sticks up Uchiha's asses and a host of other obscene taunts. Once more, she pondered how she had become her best friend. Naturally, she was already aware of the cause. Kushina's enthusiasm and positive outlook had significantly lifted her out of her depression after her mother's death. She was always taught that the clan should come first and the village should come second because she was a Uchiha who possessed the Sharingan. She had some conflicting beliefs because Kushina and her boyfriend Minato prioritized the village over everything else. But they don't belong to clans. Perhaps if they had, it would have affected her more. Although Kushina was to blame for the haughtiness of the Uchiha clan, which she was proud to lack, this did not imply that she lacked confidence. I wonder if she's doing well. She and Minato were assigned to combat Suna ninja in the land of rivers. I'm hoping she's doing well. After a little persuasion and the exchange of passwords, they entered the town. The sound of an alarm and the flares lighting up across town interrupted her thankfulness that their run was over. According to her Jonin captain, that's from the east entrance. Uchiha, inform HQ of the status of the northern sector. All right, she said. Prior to everyone leaping in the direction of the disturbance. A counterattack already? She hurried to the top of a nearby building. He didn't think much of her, even though she was likely more talented than the other two Chunin she was with. But she had an order to obey, and the sooner she did, the sooner she could assist in defense. She couldn't help but wonder if it was her eyes or the attitude of her clan as a whole that made him dislike her. Her damp hair became even more soaked than the light misty rain, as if the rain had accelerated. She ignored it and pressed on, ready to encounter any opposition from the potential assault. In order to avoid wasting time on the larger buildings, she took a slight detour and passed the center buildings. He's heading away from the attack, and isn't wearing the standard attire, she said, spotting movement to her left. She sped up to catch up with him. Soon he joined her, stopping in front of him on a small but wide roof. After examining him closely, she concluded that he was either hiding in the town or infiltrating because he was not wearing any Konoha Shinobi identifying clothing. Seeing some color in a dreary and gray environment was almost uplifting. He was dressed in orange pants that contrasted poorly with the gray texture of the building and a red jacket with thick orange stripes on either side of his arm. Apparently fond of orange, if its frequent occurrence was any guide. She could see the blonde hair hanging over his cerulean eyes, which were serious and irritated. She instantly had a mental picture of Minato. She cleared her mind and activated her bloodline limit, ready to kill him. She could see no external response. Most shinobi were generally intimidated by her clan's notoriety. This guy, She was uncomfortable with his lack of response. Not a single flinch, as if he were made of stone. Her eyes failed to detect any subtle movement. The muscles beneath her eyes tensed. Is he grinning? She tried to project her confidence while standing her ground. His eyes were eager, but they were not hostile. The fact that she was still annoyed only made her more irate. No games, huh? At least you're not like the other one I ran into. Oh, don't worry, that guy is completely fine. No one's in danger as far as I know. When she tried to use genjutsu, it was successful, only to have it fail right away. What? Without any hand signals? How did he catch it so fast? The amusement in his eyes was clear to her. Genjutsu won't work on me, sadly. Makoto could feel her palms becoming clammy, even though they hadn't moved an inch. He totally believes in himself. His fiery eyes and body language were two different things. He exuded an air of unmistakable confidence and had no doubts about himself. Makoto was able to trust that he had the abilities to support him. To calm herself, she inhaled deeply. Genjutsu was probably out of the question, he said, observing her intently and analyzing every move. I'd like to hang out some more, but you know, I'm a bit tired from today. Like, I don't think you can understand it. Plus the whole lot of angry shinobi in a few short minutes. He said softly. She would be happy to make fun of him, since it was obvious that he was waiting for her to do something first. She told him, I'm a Uchiha. But more to herself to ease her anxiety. We belong to the Hidden Leafs elites, she said, brandishing her katana at him. Everything has a flaw. She swiftly moved across the gap between them, sending chakra to her feet and bringing her sword in a downward diagonal slash. Which, using his left hand, he quickly blocked with his kunai. Unfazed, Makoto continued to apply pressure to her blade and attempted to strike his head with a left kick, which he promptly deflected with his right forearm. After a swift retreat, she dove back in to land more blows. She heard metal scraping against metal as he deflected or blocked her blows, and her Sharingan recorded his deft and skilled movements. He seems to be playing with me, she said, not even retaliating. She sheathed her katana and leapt away. As soon as she touched down, she immediately closed the gap again, saying, I'm no master at kenjutsu yet. She put him in a defensive position and threw punches that would only be deflected, but she realized she had the advantage. However, despite her Sharingan's assistance, she was unable to land any solid hits. She blocked his hard punches as he began to retaliate, certain that they would leave bruises the next morning. She was able to secure a firm grip on Kushina's wrist by throwing a left hook that he blocked with his left hand, drawing inspiration from their sparring. Using her Sharingan to predict his next move, she punched with her right fist and watched as he attempted to block it while she kicked him in the ribs. The only response was a grunt as he responded with a kick of his own, but she applied enough force for her kick to land. Before he could land it, she backed off. Taijutsu isn't going to work for me either. Every time she deflected one of his vicious blows, she became numb. She only managed to land one solid hit during their brief altercation, and it didn't even appear to have winded him. Why didn't he grab me? He could have done the same to me. She grabbed some shuriken from her pouch and hurled them at him. She leapt back and, while still in midair, performed a few hand signals. She took a breath and then released her clan's distinctive jutsu. A raging ball of fire that engulfed the whole roof. The big ball of fire came rapidly toward him from the short distance. There's no way for him to escape. The dazzling flame would surely warn anyone in the vicinity. She swiftly put her right hand in a reverse grip on the hilt of her blade just in case. After it passed, she saw a hole in the roof. What's up? She heard, almost in jest, behind her. She had already spun around and swiftly drew her sword to cut him. A loud slap reached her ears. Even if you draw it quickly. No matter how hard she tried to push her blade through it, he held it between his palms. It remained stationary. He let out a heavy sigh. He didn't sound patronizing when he said, That's good enough, I'd enjoy a little spar, but I'm a bit too tired of all this. Perhaps some other time? Even she found it difficult to kill him or injure him. At that moment, a few of her fellow shinobi arrived. A dazzling flash of light appeared first, and then her eyes swiftly adapted. She saw the enormous ball of fire coming their way. Too big and too fast for her to get away. In order to prevent him from moving, she kept applying pressure to her blade. He looked over his shoulder, those moments probably shorter. Unconcerned, his face taking on a more solemn expression. Her eyes caught the chakra that formed around him, even though he appeared to erupt in a wild fire. She was unbalanced, lost her grip, and was able to take her katana from her after one hand released it and she felt a powerful tug on her sword. He lifted his other hand as though to grasp. She was shocked when the giant fireball was crushed out of existence by a giant transparent hand that appeared and caught it. Her gaze landed on the many phoenix flower balls that were bolstering the assault. Makoto documented his understanding of a method he employed. The fire that surrounded him vanished, smoke appeared next to him, and hand signs appeared. With a flourish, the clone materialized and leapt into the air, flipping and avoiding the fireball. Infused shuriken. The clone was solid, but it sped past them without attempting to engage. The real one lost sight of him and disengaged, descending into the streets below. Down there, she yelled, and before she could object, two of them heard and pursued the clone. The only answer to the question, was he messing with me? Was the patter of the rain and the sound of commands being yelled. Konan prodded him in the shoulder and said, "Naruto." In what seemed to be a warm sleep, he lay sideways, wrapped in his red jacket. An intimidating sword was lying in front of him. There was also another bag of food lying close by, one he had never had before. Yahiko was eating some of the food he had brought with him when she turned to look around. Even though he didn't have much, he had offered to give some. An hour had passed since they had woken up, but the oldest was still asleep. He was not even stirred by the cracking thunder that shook the ground beneath them. She repeated, "Naruto." While jabbing him in the shoulder, she persisted until at last he responded to what she had done. Another poke because he muttered something unintelligible, until he opened one eye at last, exhausted. It took a moment for it to focus on her. "Woo," he said in a sleep, heavy voice. "You're finally awake?" he asked with a disapproving frown. She was still getting to know him. She was fed, whether or not his dreams were real, and lots of it. He was amiable without being suspicious. He didn't act with malice in his heart. Before making a decision, she wanted to find out a little more. She stayed because of his food offerings. She asked, "Where did you get this?" and took the blade by the handle. She was taken aback by how little weight it had, so she set it down after demonstrating it. He didn't really respond to her. "Found it," he muttered. He closed his eyes once more and attempted to fall asleep. "So you found this big bag of food too?" he asked. Anything left on the side of the road was picked up for food or sold, but she didn't believe it. To emphasize her point, she shook the bag. Tiredly, he opened his eyes again, but his slumber was gradually fading. He wiped the fatigue from his eyes and sat up. He just stared at her while leaning back against the cave's surface. He gave a deep yawn. "All right, I took it from the village when you were sleeping. I've gotten it just for the two of you." She gazed at him, contemplating a number of things. If he had just taken it, or, in actuality, if he could slip back into the ninja-infested village, he was more than capable of handling himself. "I forgot to give the sword back to the pretty kunoichi too." A further yawn. "Can you get me a rice ball? I'm going to head back to sleep. Eat whatever you want, Yahiko too." His proposal started to excite her. She swiftly reached into the bag, took out his request, and gave it to him. With a muttered, "Thank you," he lay back down with his back to her. She had almost puked the other day, and aside from yesterday, she couldn't remember the last time she had filled her stomach. Her mouth watered from the hot water and steaming ramen. She started eating, taking care to get some for Yahiko, who had graciously offered some of the food he had found. She approached the boy with the orange hair and gave him some of her food. She sat down and resumed eating, saying, "Have some, there's plenty more, Naruto's treat." She wasn't complaining at all, but there wasn't any hot food. "Oh, thanks," he said, concentrating on his meal instead of conversing. He put some in his backpack. She was considering staying with Naruto. He was unquestionably trained to fight or flee. With all the food and cash he had on hand, he was easily surviving the war. In addition to pointing out that she was totally free to leave whenever she wanted, he also seemed to be quite sincere in his wishes. She assumed that staying for a while would not hurt anything. For the moment, they finished eating, and everything felt wonderful. We tried to savor that fact for a few minutes of silence. She noticed that Yahiko, the boy, was looking at Naruto, hearing the echo of snoring in the cave. "So, does he usually sleep in this long?" "Oh, I wouldn't know." "Really? How long have you two known each other?" he asked, tilting his head. "Well, actually, I only met him yesterday. He also fed me too." She nodded when he said, "And just now too." To demonstrate his point, the oldest of them snored loudly before calming down. "Well, I want to thank him personally. It looks like he worked hard on it." Indeed, he appeared quite worn out. When they spoke a while ago, he never really woke up. Evidently, he was still exhausted from the previous evening's events. Was his prize wearing a sword? What was it that he did? Would he divulge his actions? Now he looked so exposed. She remembered that he had, in a way, claimed to be ill. This might have been it. As they waited for the blonde to wake up from his sleep, they continued their conversation. She took a seat and looked out of the tiny cavern they were in. A number of clouds broke apart and the sun's bright rays peeked through the veil as the misty rain finally stopped. Every time the rain stopped, it was so pleasant. She wondered how long it would last as she felt the sun's warmth. She heard Naruto stirring behind her, as though he had sensed that the rain had stopped. He sat up, waking slowly while occasionally letting out a sigh, until he asked at last, "What's the time?" She checked the watch she was carrying and replied, "Noon. 12 hours. Wow." He wiped his eyes, yawned deeply, and went to his bag to get some food. At last, he caught sight of the other boy they were with. It was strange how much they resembled one another. They both had soft blue eyes, spiky hair, and somewhat similar facial features. "Hey, you two look like you're related." Both of them appeared shocked by her analogy. Prior to Yahiko's eventual speech, "Hey, I want to thank you for giving some of your food." Naruto gave him a strange look, as if he was trying to recall him. "No problem. Anything else?" It felt a little strange to stay for a simple thank you now that he had brought it up. "So you know how to fight, huh? You said you snuck into the town before?" Naruto appeared content as he continued to eat. "Sure did." Since they were talking about it, she inquired, "How did you do that, by the way?" He finished eating and pulled a shirt and some clothes out of the bag. "I think they were setting up camp, so they weren't expecting me to be alone, or so soon." He began using the cloth to wipe the blade, then tore the shirt and wrapped it around the jagged steel. Yahiko appeared to be completely absorbed in his work and not interested in what the blonde was doing. She started to ask, "What are you?" "Me? I'm just making sure there's no water on it. I want to make sure it doesn't fall apart before I return it. If I ever do, that is. Besides, I'm not the kind to use something like this." "You want to return it?" was a nonsensical question. Then she recalled his peace negotiations. Then she could presume that he had not murdered anyone to get what he had brought back. "I hope I get two," he said, draping linen around the sword. He exuded an air that was somewhat unassuming. She enjoyed the idea that she was skilled at spotting lies. Konan solidified the notion that he was a decent man. At last, with a determined expression, Yahiko asked, "So you know how to fight, right?" Before Naruto could respond, he spoke once more. "How did you learn?" Naruto just leaned back against the rock wall and stared blankly. "This old guy taught me, well, before he was murdered," he said without showing any emotion. Yahiko's eyes were bright with anticipation. "Hey, I have pretty neat idea. Well, it involves you teaching us, but will you teach me too?" Then we can all watch out for one another and stuff. You know, be friends and all?" She must have been taken aback. She had only considered surviving another day, but that changed just now as she started thinking about the next meal. Previously, no one had ever offered her food, but these two did. She chuckled softly. That's what Naruto had said, except the way he phrased it sounded much better. Surprised, he turned to face Naruto. "Huh? You had the same idea too?" smiled the person. Naruto crawled out from inside and made his way outside, saying, "Yeah, I don't think we're the first ones either." "That's a yes, Yahiko. I mean, I never taught anyone how to fight from the ground up, but I'll guess I'll try. If I can't, we'll certainly find someone who definitely can." Yahiko answered, "It doesn't matter, we stick together, we'll do all right." They appeared to have similar values, which Konan thought was advantageous. Because Yahiko trusted him so quickly, she made the decision to follow suit. "I want to join too." Naruto grinned as his eyes grew wide. "Great, we're one step closer." In her sleep bag, Makoto lay. Merely remaining in her tent's ceiling, she could hear the dripping above all the time. It was barely big enough to hold her and the things she brought with her, it wasn't even tall enough to sit in. The memories of what had happened the night before tormented her. The man she had a fight with, who had stayed back and outpaced people like the Uchiha chief's son. Fugaku was a bit of a dick, though, for hurling a fireball at her. She was hesitant to believe him when he said he hadn't seen her. She accepted his rather heartfelt apology. She suspected she wouldn't receive an apology at all if she wasn't a Uchiha. In addition to the distinction of plan first, she wished they would abandon the succeed the mission at any cost mentality that many Konoha shinobi adopted. The main goal was to destroy the enemy in order to win the war. Minato and Kushina following the comrade first pleased her. Nobody knew when this war would end, but everyone was growing weary of it. It seems that Shimura was the one who caused this to get out of hand. With the added consequence of more deaths, the mission success rate had increased. She wasn't eager to add that to the list of things. The blue-eyed blonde she had fought with mostly interrupted her thoughts. If their fight was any indication, he was very capable. All of his breathing indicated that he was exhausted, as he had responded. Since he was familiar with the Uchiha, He had leapt away and somehow knew that shuriken were inside the tiny flames. He found her genjutsu right away and disrupted it too quickly to be of any use, so it was useless. Because he used shadow clones to outsmart the chief's son, he was also accountable for the panic that resulted. Who was that guy? She questioned herself. What she was told this morning made her shudder. No POWs had escaped, no infiltrators were discovered, and none of the remaining civilians had any information. His search of the building where they had assigned potentially lost valuable items was the only clue. Until a potential cause was identified, the entire town had been on lockdown alert, with no one leaving or entering. He had completely rendered a dozen chunin and even some jonin unconscious, but no one noticed him enter. They were all positioned around the building housing the lost and found. That he had done it entirely undetected sounded impossible. With the exception of minor bruises, none were hurt at all. He made this entire company look like idiots. He could have killed so many people on his own. I could have killed so many too. She could hear someone kicking at her tent's flaps. Makoto? What is it? Makoto loudly climbed out of her tent and said, "Can I ask your help for something?" When she got up, she saw an older Akira who was about her height but still quite small. She had shoulder-length blonde hair and was rather unremarkable. She wore dark blue pants and a chunin vest. She was a member of the squad to which she was assigned. Makoto's acquaintance, to put it mildly. What for? She questioned. Help find my bag at that. A lost items thingy or whatever, she said. Makoto desperately wanted to refuse her. However, Kushina's final words were, find some damn friends, and Akira was the only person outside of her fellow Uchiha to approach her. Although Makoto knew a lot of the Uchiha clan, she didn't want to hang out with many of them due to their conceit. She hoped the blonde would drop her katana and not steal it. Sure, lead the way, I need to find my blade anyway. Thanks, was her cheerful response. Together, they made their way to a group of buildings. She fervently hoped it wasn't stolen by him. So did you hear that one guy knocked out our sentries yesterday? She inquired. After waiting for her typical response, she answered, yeah, I actually fought him. She hoped the last part was more of a joke than a serious inquiry. Oh, how did it go? How did he look like? How old was he? Was he cute? She asked. Despite their short acquaintance, Akira enjoyed discussing boys. She's competent enough, at least. Why do you want to know? He's the enemy. He can't be that bad if he hadn't really hurt anyone. Came in, went out without doing a whole lot. She couldn't really dispute that. Even during her fight with him, she didn't feel particularly threatened. In addition, she believed he could have ended her right away. Either way, she sighed. I wouldn't know what he looked like. He had the majority of face hidden. I can only say that he had blonde hair and blue eyes. It really reminded me of Minato Namikaze. She gave a coo. He's really a looker, isn't he? Even though she had to agree, she would never express it verbally. He was well known in the village because of rumors that he was a prodigy. His early success as a jonin was evidence of his skill. No, she wasn't one. They swiftly navigated the town and the sights, locating the building where the misplaced items were kept. She had heard that the offender had been spotted here, so they went inside and took down Uchiha. So, how does your bag look? I'm not sure, really. What? Anyway, I just received that bag, and it should have a tag inside. As Akira wandered off toward the assortment of bags and other large items in the corner, she herself went to the weapons that were neatly arranged in the middle of the room and said, "You're so forgetful." She hoped that the blue-eyed guy hadn't stolen her sword because she searched for it multiple times and closely examined similar blades, but she was unable to locate it. She sulked inside before deciding that it might take some time to show up and that she would have to keep checking later. She pulled herself over to where Akira was still looking. Did you find what you were searching for? No, I didn't. Hopefully it turns up. So, she opened a pack and glanced inside, putting it aside when it wasn't her friend's, and waited, wondering what she would ask. Have you considered your future? Akira said. What do you mean? She answered, meaning, I would like to have a family one day. Well, I haven't really thought about it. You're 17, after all. The majority of her clan was preoccupied with trying to survive this war, so heroics can wait. She was surprised by her response. Another concern was trying to be a worthy kunoichi for her clan and village. It's for the future obviously, not right now. It made her wonder if there would be any repercussions if a kunoichi discovered she was pregnant while they were serving in the military. Even though she only served for a year during the war, it seemed like she had been deployed for a lifetime. When she opened the bag and saw that Uzumaki was written on the tag inside, her thoughts and everything Akira said were interrupted. She stared at it blankly, making sure she wasn't having hallucinations. Uzumaki, she muttered. From what she understood, the Uzumaki had been exterminated at the start of the war, and Kushina was the only one in the village. Curious, she looked inside and discovered food, scrolls, and an extremely strange object. Since Kushina wasn't assigned anywhere close to her, in fact, it was 2 days south, it became clear that the Leaf Village headband, which was stitched on a long piece of black cloth, wasn't hers. Akira declared, holding it up for everyone to see, found it. It probably didn't belong to anyone in her battalion, but Kushina decided it was in her best interest and took the bag, putting it around her shoulders. Konan walked with the 2 people she had met. She had never had any company before, and although she felt significantly safer, she wasn't able to survive for very long without being cautious. She glanced at Naruto, who appeared to be very thoughtful but would occasionally look away for short periods of time, possibly because he had claimed to be shinobi trained. There were some other refugees, but they kept to themselves on the opposite side of the road they walked on. The rain, which seemed to last forever, fell softly, although she thought it usually fell harshly. It was a pleasant change of pace, as if it were a sign of a lull. Naruto. Well, what is it? Gazing at her beneath his hood, he inquired. Is it okay if I ask you something? She asked, observing Yahiko glance briefly. Given their close proximity, she was confident he would hear whatever was said. All right. Friends ask each other questions. Ask what you want because you know each other. She had many questions she wanted to ask, but asking so many at once felt impolite. So, how do you think we'll achieve this dream of yours? She was unable to fully comprehend how they would complete it. Naruto smiled at him. Well, through what my godfather would say, he desired that peace to be achieved through mutual understanding, no violence, and to resolve our hate for each other. I want to stop this war, Yahiko said, adding that it sounded fairly straightforward. I do too, but I think it sounds pretty hard, Yahiko went on, speaking more angrily, so we have something in common. I want to train for that reason. Naruto appeared somewhat pleased about that. Hey, then that means we're partners then. But there's a catch. You can't give up, no matter what. That's what being a shinobi means. Nothing is impossible for you to accomplish with your allies by your side. No more fighting, just peace. You won't have to worry about anything ever again, said Yahiko, lowering his voice as he gazed up at the gray sky. She vowed to herself that it would be her dream as well, but it sounded unreal to her right now, seeing the hungry faces of the refugees she passed. It was only something to dream about, but the way they believed in it made it seem possible. The only thing that cheered him up was that the land of rain was not as big as his home country. What would have been a day's run, if unbroken, would have taken a week to complete, and that was only taking into consideration the length of the country. They were only going to a town. They had walked at a snail's pace to what he was used to. He kept watch over Yahiko and Konan's sleeping bodies beneath their shelter, if that can ever be described, which was merely a cliffside slope that protected them from the overhead rain. If a wind blew in an unfavorable direction, they would wake up soaked. If they were shinobi, Naruto thought, they would have entered the town that Yahiko had chosen, but they weren't yet. They were still civilians, and they couldn't support themselves nearly as well as shinobi. Since he didn't know much about the country, he had suggested that Yahiko choose their settlement, and Yahiko gladly proposed that they go somewhere farther from the war zones, where danger wouldn't be able to reach them for some time. Unaware that he had taken his father's kunai from his tool bag, he fiddled with it, tracing the kanji engraved on its handle, which appeared to be worn already. He was unable to recall the technique, of course, but it was something to remember his father by. Are you prepared to leave? With his Edo Tensei eyes still in place, Naruto looked at his father, who, like Minato, had managed to escape with Kurama's assistance. Naruto nodded, taking a deep breath at the sudden surge of power now that Kurama's full power was involved. He picked up the bag at his feet and sighed loudly. Yeah. Kurama had mentioned that they might end up a few months before he attacked, and he was unsure of the side effects of performing the jutsu because it required a lot of chakra. He also looked at the blonde hair that hung just above his eyes. Relax, Naruto. You are my son, after all. Despite his inability to save his friends, Naruto was able to smile despite his failure. Naruto answered, this time, I won't fail. Minato closed his eyes and gave his son a small smile before saying, that's more like it. Now, there's something I want to give you. What? With its handle facing him, he handed him one of his special kunai. It's a bit heavy and unconventional, but it's incredibly sturdy, built to last, he said. Naruto slowly grasped the handle of the three-pronged kunai, which was larger than an ordinary kunai and had a faint yellow tint. Thanks, Dad. Soon after, he had left, knowing that the world would be in good hands with Naruto. Minato no longer belonged to the world and wanted to be with his wife, Naruto's own mother. He felt a sting in his throat, but he quickly managed it. He thought about his first fight with the kunai, and he smiled a little at the spar as he twirled it in his hand, feeling as though it would last as his father had said. Even though she was short, the Sharingan girl he fought on top of a roof had an odd vibe. Kinda nostalgic. He was relieved that there were at least some Uchiha who weren't complete jerks, as it brought back memories of the altercation with Sasuke above the hospital roof, but with far less haughtiness than Sasuke displayed. I shouldn't be thinking about the past. I guess the future. No, that won't happen. Damn, it's confusing, he said, shaking his thoughts away as he recalled some of the times he had fought alongside Sasuke against Obito. The cages of the elemental nations, including all of his friends, were among the many shinobi who had been caught in the Tsukiyomi. They all had emotionless expressions, and he was powerless to help them. Some of them even had a smile on their faces, and they lived in their own fake world. Naruto fell to his knees as the red glow of the moon shone down on the ground, and puddles formed from the rain, techniques, and blood from fallen ninja that covered the ground. Damn it, there was nothing I could do. He screamed in pain at his mistakes as the wounds on his knuckles kept healing as he repeatedly slammed his fist into the damp dirt and rocks. After a while, he collapsed onto his side, his fist feeling extremely numb from the abuse. If everything is essentially dead, what good is life? He had to do something, but he was immobile. He realized that he hadn't slept for a long time, that he had fought with everything he had today, and that it didn't matter in the end. He couldn't stop thinking about the faces of Hinata, Sakura, Kakashi, Sasuke, and everyone else. He closed his eyes and fell into a dark, restless sleep. Naruto opened his eyes, felt his heart pounding in his chest, and kept his breathing under control. He sat up, listened to the rain, and looked around him. He sat on a small, worn mattress, and to his right, he saw Yahiko and Konan sleeping on their own mattress. They discovered the cave where they slept, and at Yahiko's suggestion, they decided to make it their little home. They had arrived in town a day earlier, and Naruto had spent the majority of the money on supplies. When Konan asked him how he had obtained the money, Yahiko told him that he had undoubtedly obtained it through theft, leaving his precious Gamma-chan almost empty. He looked at the orange-haired boy and said, "I would gladly do it to protect and help them if they had to resort to stealing pretty soon. These wars are horrible." Naruto had learned that his father had been killed by a desperate, starving person last year, and that he had been raised as a merchant's son who traveled often, which is why he knew the towns and landscape. He got up, went to the small package in the cave's corner, took it out, and took out a small portable stove. He put the fuel in and started preparing food for the others. Now that they were inside and out of the rain, she had shed her coat and was wearing a simple pale pink long-sleeve shirt and blue pants. "Hey Konan," he said. "What is that?" "It has a pleasant scent," he said. "It's breakfast." It was a very basic breakfast consisting of some eggs, cheese, and toast with butter. It wasn't fancy, but it was better than what they had eaten to get here. The food was far superior to the cold canned soup they were eating, as well as the soggy rice balls and wet bread. It had definitely gotten cold in the morning. Konan yawned as she wrapped her blanket around herself and went to where he was sitting. Naruto had gotten a big flat rock from outside to use as a table. It was still a little wet from the rain, but it was supported by other flat rocks that reached his shin. The table was a meter from their small cave's entrance, where their supplies would be kept to the right and they would sleep on the left. "So you're a good cook?" When she had quietly gotten up and gotten ready for the day, Konan had said, he didn't really do much but cook. "Yup," he said, being careful not to make too much noise because Yahiko was sleeping. "May I have a few?" As she eyed a plate of food on the rock table, he noticed a hungry expression in her eyes. After giving it some thought, he concluded that Yahiko would likely be out of it for some time. He flipped the egg as he reached for his plate, turned the stove down so he could eat more comfortably, brought out forks for both of them, and they each grabbed one. He thanked her for the food and noticed a momentary expression of shock on her face, but she joined him right away. She appeared to be resisting the urge to devour the food as soon as possible. "The food is hot." She ate faster than he was at the moment, saying in between mouthfuls, "I don't even remember I had them last. Something besides ramen." They ate in silence for a while, with the only sounds coming from the rain, the light scraping of forks on plastic plates, and Yahiko's loud snoring. "I'm glad you like it. It's going to be like that for a while," he said, despite the fact that it only involved hot water and a different type of meal. She asked resolutely, "Can you teach me how to cook?" Naruto quickly wiped the surprise from his face as he looked up at her. Her parents never taught her, and she was never given the opportunity to educate herself. He nodded and said, "Of course, in fact, I'll show you right now." "Huh?" He motioned her to come along. "Right now?" "Yeah, come on." Konan got up fast, walked around the table, and sat down directly next to him. He swiftly removed a slightly burnt egg from the small pan with a spatula and set it on a spare plate. Since it was her first attempt at cooking, he left the heat in place. She said, "So, what do we do?" He allowed her to handle his father's kunai and said, "Well, put some butter on the pan with this kunai." She placed the butter on the pan and it began to melt, saying, "That's too much." "Yup, that's okay." She looked curiously at the melting butter and asked, "What does the butter really do?" She nodded in agreement, and the butter began to sizzle. "Well, it doesn't make the food stick to the pan and it can make food taste better." He gave her an egg. "Here, make it crack on the pan." "How?" He used his hands to hold an imaginary egg on the pan's edge and said, "Like this. And then when it cracks, you split the egg with your fingers." She shakily pushed the egg over the pan's edge and brought it down with too much force, saying, "Right. I'll try." She gasped as the yolk spilled onto the stove after the shell broke. He attempted to comfort her by saying, "Hey, don't worry about it, just try again." He made an attempt to give her another egg, which prompted her to shake her head once more. With hesitation, she said, "We need to save our food, don't we?" Then how are you supposed to learn how to cook, huh?" He asked curiously. "About that, I'm pretty much out of money, but we can always steal." "I don't know. I guess. Listen, I messed up a lot when I learned how to cook, you'll get better, promise." "Okay. If you say so," she said, taking the egg again. "Here's an easier way. Break the shell over the pan with the kunai." When his advice worked and no harm was done, Konan grinned. "So when do I flip it?" "When it becomes more solid. There, now you can do it," she said awkwardly, flipping it into a fold. "Not that much of a difference. It's ready now." Konan remarked, "It's not as great looking. Probably tastes just the same though." They didn't even have power, so she searched for a toaster and asked, "If you say so, how did you even make toast?" With this, he held up a metal can to her, its top and bottom ripped off. The top had some wire wrapped around it. He took out the pan and put the can in its place. She watched with interest as he turned it over and said, "There, now breakfast for Yahiko is done, so let's wake him up. Just put some bread and it will be toast soon enough." As he demonstrated how to prepare some soup for Konan, he thought absently, "I wonder when Nagato is going to show up. Now add the tomatoes." They had been here 2 weeks, and their supply of food that they had purchased with his money was now empty. It appeared that his line of thought was similar to Yahiko's, so she picked up the small cutting board that was full of diced tomatoes and dropped it into the soup. The orange-haired man sat down beside the table and yelled, "Now we gotta steal. It's the only way." "Really?" Konan inquired as she glanced at him to make sure. "I also believe so." Even though he knew it was inevitable, Naruto and Yahiko tried to find something to do, saying, "I mean, if we're going to be strong shinobi, we gotta eat right, you know?" The creature inside of him laughed deeply and amusedly. "You ate ramen all your life, Naruto, so that's pretty funny coming from you. You essentially only ate ramen, so you can't lie," Kurama said, laughing further. Even though he barely used the stuff every day while he was with Jiraiya, he felt ashamed of that fact. Yahiko said, "Now you're thinking." He pulled him back to the present and away from the sewer whenever he spoke to Kurama, as not much time had gone by. "This war had taken everything from us, so it's only right that we take back some of it, right? Is the soup ready now?" "I think so." Konan looked at Naruto inquiringly. The three orphans sat and listened to the rain and, most importantly, the hot soup as he checked the soup himself. "Pretty much," he said. He continued, saying, "So Naruto. Don't mean to pry or anything, but about your past. Where are you from?" Yahiko inquired. He had to fabricate a backstory for himself at Kurama's request. Both of the orphans listened carefully as Naruto said, "I guess I'm sort of like you. I traveled with some old guy. I guess you call him my godfather since he knew my dad since before he." You know, they nodded in comprehension. "You do realize they were shinobi?" He gave a nod. "Look at this kunai." He produced the special one he had previously received, saying, "This one belonged to my dad, it's special to me." "And you used it as a butter knife," was the teasing comment that Yahiko made after he and Konan leaned in to take a closer look. Naruto couldn't contain his laughter. The orange-haired boy went on, nodding to himself in admiration of his insight. "It's kind of disrespectful if you asked me." Yeah, whatever," he said, setting aside the other bowl for himself and Konan. Yahiko was the first to finish, but instead of getting up, he just stared at him resolutely as they ate in silence for the moment. "Do you think you can teach us now, Naruto? Shinobi training?" he asked, blinking at them. "Yes. Well, to be honest, it's all really simple for me," Naruto said, massaging his neck. Given how long it has been since I started, it comes naturally to me. When did you begin? I started receiving instruction when I was 6 years old. I did pretty well too, earning all the best grades. Top marks in what, really? Well, based on what my master said, he was also a top student in his class. According to what he told me, there is a school where you can learn the fundamentals, how to shape your chakra, and other things. After that, you are selected for a team and given a jonin, a skilled ninja, to help you learn a little more. Which village is it from? You know, I actually never asked. He just trained me so I didn't really care. Naruto attempted to pretend to be perplexed. Konan said, what do they teach at Shinobi schools? After Yahiko nodded. Well, according to the elderly man, he taught me all of the material that is typically covered in school. Fundamentals. Tool throwing, chakra control, blade handling, boring-ass safety, a little ninjutsu, and taijutsu. I probably forgot about a lot of other things. How would I use a sword, then? Yahiko answered. Well, I learned about it, how to take care of it, and how to handle it at an amateur level. I'm not a master of it, and I don't have any ninjutsu. Therefore, I don't believe I could teach you much. Why don't we begin with that? I think teaching you the first thing I learned is better, he responded. Yahiko scowled and muttered that it was more enjoyable. How do we do that? Konan inquired. Well, how can I describe this? It's inside you. You kind of have to meditate to find it, Naruto said, scratching his head. It shouldn't be too difficult to bring it out once you've located it. However, learning control is another difficult aspect. Finding your chakra is the first step, followed by bringing it out and, I suppose, focusing on it and attempting to control it. I was told that walking is the type of exercise you should do until it comes naturally to you. Do you follow those steps each time you attempt a technique, such as ninjutsu? Pretty much, but that doesn't count a whole lot of other stuff you gotta do after. Like what? There were many questions, and he was unsure of how to answer them, so he asked inquisitively. After that, let's head there. History was primarily about ninjas, and the first year isn't all that different from a civilian school in terms of math and grammar. When he taught Konohamaru the Rasengan and the Shadow Clone, it felt very different from what it was now, but they stared at him as if they were waiting for him to say something else first. The first thing I learned was how to access my chakra, which I suppose is the same thing you should do. Try raising it by making the tiger hand sign, which looks like this. However, I don't think it will be that simple for you to access. Yahiko said, don't worry, Naruto. We'll finish it as soon as possible. Konan nodded in agreement. I'm sure you know this by now, but you're given this when you completed shinobi training, he said, fingering the metal piece in his ninja pack. He removed Sasuke's headband, which had a horizontal line that was scratched all the way down. The others were quiet, but he sighed, this one belonged to my best friend. So he was a member of the Hidden Leaf. Used too, the line across means that he abandoned it. He never had the opportunity to persuade him to come back, and the two remained silent. Yahiko began, so I've been thinking. Who should be the leader if we do want to be a group? Oh, we'll all be one, you know, like a company cages, he responded. The child muttered, I just wanted to see if you were on the same page as all. Hey, I think you ought to start practicing chakra access so that it comes naturally to you. Then, when we arrive, I'll come up with something. He was still recovering his chakra, which made him frown, but it didn't take nearly as long, a couple days at most. How long had it been? Weeks. Konan and Yahiko continued in this manner for the next few weeks. Maybe if you weren't training every day you'll know for sure how long it takes for you to recover, Kurama responded while yawning. I can't help it, I can't really afford to stay rusty in a time like this. Sure, as long as you don't push yourself too hard. Yes, indeed. When he returned from any physical activity, he would simply stand around or lie down all day because he didn't really know what to do and he was careful not to use too much chakra during training. Though he still required both hands, he was able to create a one-handed Rasengan without Kurama's assistance or a shadow clone. He wasn't even certain that they were in the place where they were supposed to meet Nagato, so there was a lot of downtime while they waited for him to do so, if at all. In order to make a one-handed Rasengan, which he had been working on almost every day off, he was able to steal some rubber balls, some of which were lying around in the cave. Yahiko was currently playing with one of them, lying on his bed and tossing it into the air. I was just wondering if you might try sealing. I've been considering that since you don't seem to be able to sustain as long anymore, you might want to try that, Kurama said. It will be somewhat useful. Sealing ninjutsu, I don't even know a whole of it. Kurama didn't seem to bother to respond, possibly because he was already bored with his conversation, but it made him think, perhaps he could learn when his master showed up. There were probably too many techniques for him to list, but he knew that only a few required hand signs, some required deep concentration, some could be done with only a loose amount, and others needed to be written. Some seals required a long prep time, while others only required a short one. Some required ink infused with chakra, while others could be done later, and the few that required rituals. Despite the fact that it was all confusing and gave him a headache, he reasoned that he could improve his writing skills and use it as a diversion from sitting around all day. At one point, he had made the decision to attempt learning sealing ninjutsu. "What are you doing, Naruto?" As he sat trying to write, he noticed Konan giving him a questioning look. "Just practicing my writing, it's for seals," he said. In addition, he chose to illustrate the diagrams of various hand seals. It goes without saying that his drawing abilities were not very good, so he discarded the jumbled mess of scribbles before drawing it again and again. He believed he was a far better artist than this, and there was a bag of discarded paper at his feet with drawings on both sides from his practice. "Oh, all right. Do you think I could borrow some paper?" "Go ahead," he said, concentrating on his careless writing, which he really needed to improve. At the very least, there should be no jagged lines or curves. The sun had already gone down, and the only light inside was a lantern that ran on batteries. Yahiko was already asleep, exhausted from accessing his chakra, and after they had finished, he had them repeatedly stressing it, likening it to muscles, which they did to gain strength. Usually, this resulted in them calling it a night early. As he practiced writing lines, he heard Konan fold a lot of papers. His thoughts at the moment were focused on where Killer B might be, either back at the Hidden Cloud or somewhere in the Warring Nations, but wherever he was, they would probably meet eventually, and it wasn't like the nations were friendly again. "You are aware of how similar you and Yahiko are?" He was pulled away to Konan, who was seated across from him. "Really? How?" As he made a mistake on a line on the paper, his eye twitched and he asked. "You two have similar appearances and shared similar opinions, however, he doesn't speak very well." He looked quizzically at her, but she didn't elaborate, so he blinked and said, "Huh." He probably agreed with whatever Yahiko said because he wanted Nagato to come. Rather, she presented him with an origami crane and said, "I wanted to thank you for being a friend." Given all the seal related thoughts, he pondered whether her paper was made entirely of seals or if it was more akin to those puppets. He carefully examined the piece and said, "That's pretty cool." He had never really received any gifts before, aside from his father. The only other things he had ever received were from Hinata and Iruka. A forehead protector a few weeks prior, and a container of medicinal cream that had been lost during Pain's attack. He had lost both of them now. "I'm glad you like it, my mother taught me." As he eyed the crane that had landed in front of him, she murmured something about going to bed, and he thought about how to preserve something so delicate. After 2 months, not only were they cut off from the route to their camp, but they were also totally separated from each other, and Makoto had no idea where her other teammates were. This scouting run had gone horribly wrong. She took deep, rhythmic breaths, but the only sound she could hear was the loud, continuous raindrops. She tried to see with her keen eyes, to hear any sound that was different from the sound of the raindrops bouncing off the leaves, to catch any slight movement. It appeared to be safe for the time being. She pulled a bandage from her tool bag and applied it to a wound on her arm. If her scouting runs hadn't been pushed farther and more often to make sure such a breach wouldn't happen again, maybe these things wouldn't have happened. "I can't blame others for my own misfortune," she said, taking a deep breath to focus. Damn that guy. If he hadn't. Even so, there was a glimmer of hope that they wouldn't be in this predicament if he hadn't broken into their camp and made a fool of everyone. The map and compass that would have made the return journey safer and simpler had been taken by their Jonin commander, who had deserted them. In the month they worked together, their small scouting party had grown by 2 members, a Genin and a Chunin, one of whom Makoto knew, Akira. They might have been able to find their way back by memory, but they were being relentlessly pursued by enemy shinobi. Despite their increased size, they were totally outnumbered and outmatched to compete with the enemy shinobi. They were caught completely unprepared and suffered a fatality along with 2 injuries. They had been cut off from their retreat toward their camp and their Jonin had abandoned them for dead. She cursed her captain, hoping he would suffer a terrible death. They had come across another, bigger scouting force, or an infiltrating force, though it didn't really matter at the moment. She was able to move before their sensory shinobi focused on her location because the bandage stopped the bleeding on her arm. When she noticed movement behind the leaves, she instantly prepared a few hand signals and threw some shuriken, wondering where the other 2 she was with had disappeared to and whether they were still alive. "Whoa, it's me." Akira sighed in relief as she saw a blur of movement fall from behind the cover. "You almost shot a fire-style technique at me," she said as she stood, her eyes catching the movement and recognizing the person instantly. "All right. Makoto verified her chakra with her Sharingan to make sure it wasn't merely a transformation. "I either take action or die," she said. She said, "Right," and leapt a few times to climb onto a different branch. "Where is Jiro?" the Uchiha inquired, noticing a slight sag in her friend's shoulder and feeling sad. Another Chunin left on his own, probably hoping that the three-person group would catch their attention. Makoto was a little saddened by the loss of a teammate, but she was also a little relieved that she didn't know him. Since they had to flee, there was no time to mourn. Now, only she and Akira remained. "Let's go, we have to get out of here. Nagato, where are you?" With a curse, Naruto leapt from the tree's slick branches. He yawned, realizing that he was hours away from his friends, that he had slipped away to try to locate Nagato on his own, and that he had obtained a map to help him find his way back and other possible hotspots. AIM's geography was small. A journey from one border to another could be completed in a day or so at most. However, there was a war raging, with multiple sides, so the journey would be considerably longer. Since the Konoha Shinobi controlled most of the country, he assumed that Nagato was somewhere on the eastern or southern side, where he recalled that Nagato had claimed that Konoha Shinobi had killed his parents. There were very few days without rain, so he grumbled to himself, "It's also pretty depressing when it never stops raining." Hanzo was undoubtedly close to where they stayed, aware of his power. He knew that people would avoid them, but he was also working to get the invaders out of the country. He assumed that the reason the fighting hadn't reached their location was because that was where the majority of AIM's shinobi were concentrated. Trying to forget the past was probably more difficult than he had anticipated, but he kept track of his time here and found that it had been 3 months and 3 weeks. In order to ensure that it wouldn't deteriorate, he paused and pulled out a map, though the borders appeared to be a little bigger than he remembered. The good news was that there was no sign of Jiraiya or his teammates nearby, and there were no fights that Hanzo had been involved in, so he swiftly looked through any nearby settlements for any indication of where Nagato had stayed. Having sent some clones to the smaller settlements, he folded the map and set out for a nearby town to check for any sign of Rinnegan bearer. Kurama had stated that their plan would take years to complete, so finding Nagato and ensuring he would stay on the path was a detail that would set a small step in his plan. He knew that the tailed beasts were used as a deterrent to war, so he knew that enlisting the aid of other Jinchuriki in their time would be crucial to their goal of world peace. However, there would be trouble when the 5 great elemental nations realized that their containers were running empty. Far away, to the east and south, he had sensed some of the other Biju's chakra, but none from Kurama, who was imprisoned inside his mother. The fox had claimed that he still had all of the other tailed beast's chakra, which might be a key to convincing them. "I wonder how she is doing?" he asked, feeling a little nervous about meeting her, though he wasn't totally sure when he would approach that. Instead of speculating about when events happened, he wished he had solid and precise information. If he had known everything about his friends' personal histories, he would have done everything in his power to support them. Although he had heard a little about the ninja wars, Kurama had warned him that he might have arrived at least a few months earlier, not almost 10 years. Naruto looked at the present year, 9 years before he was even born, and the time when Obito had attacked Konoha. It seemed so distant, and he had no idea what would happen when he caught up to that period. He shook off those distant thoughts because he still needed to concentrate on finding Nagato, who needed his immediate attention. He didn't think he would find him, but maybe if he switched to Sage mode. Feeling that it was worth a try, he paused on a big branch and tried to remain motionless, as though he were a dead rock waiting for the world to move on. He took a deep breath to try to calm himself, but it felt useless because he knew the reason. He was restless and anxious. The events of his past still deeply bothered him, and the state of inaction of the previous 2 months left little to be desired. He felt his movements, stuttering involuntary. Trying to enter Sage mode was almost impossible right now. How was he going to relax more? Memories of a shadow clone began to resurface in his mind. Looking northwest to where he was now, Naruto decided to take a look and hurried off in that direction after feeling a few more pops in his head. He then created more shadow clones to conduct further searching. Makoto said to her, exhausted, "Just run, Akira," as they kept up their frantic pace. She was soaked to the bone. The chills continued to rock her spine, and her thoughts were limited to trying to keep her legs moving so she wouldn't trip. The clothes that had felt weightless just a few days ago now felt like she was carrying a ton of rubble on her. "I'll hold them back." To be honest, she considered abandoning her multiple times in order to protect her own reputation, but she had a conscience and would be a hypocrite if she followed in her comrades' footsteps. They had finally managed to return to the general direction towards their camp, but they had walked into a trap. She believed it to be a clear escape, but Rock Ninja appeared to be very adept at concealing their presence, so she didn't think she could ever face Kushina if she ever did something like that. They had managed to give them the slip, largely unscathed, and she felt the hot, burning gash that ran across her cheek, the blood sloshing out, and only a torn dot-out cloth that she applied pressure to with a hand. The other cuts and aches were nothing in comparison. She heard her complain, "I can't leave you behind." Makoto was a little relieved that not everyone detested the Uchiha's haughtiness. Maybe she had finally made a friend. "You see me bleeding, don't you?" Even though she wasn't a medical ninja, she responded that if she couldn't stop it, she would faint from blood loss because it would take time, which they didn't have. If she survived today, she would have a nasty scar under her right eye, but she was still a little grateful that her eyes had saved her from the more seasoned Kenjutsu user. Her heart was still racing frantically, and she could still feel the adrenaline rushing through her. Running didn't help either. If we carry on in this manner, she felt the sticky blood on her hand and decided it was time to change her hurried bandage. "I'll pass out and we'll both be dead with you trying to carry me." Once again, she was a little moved, but she had to be practical. "Then I'll stay back. You're aware of how that will turn out. I'm far superior to you and can use my eyes to keep them away longer. In addition, I have the best chance of escaping them." "But they're catching up, pretty soon they'll get both of us," replied Makoto. "You go, I'll stay behind." She slowed down and stopped running, and Akira saw it in a moment and stopped a few meters ahead. She joked, "I can't let Uchiha show me up," but her demeanor came across as more solemn. She was actually more exhausted than she had anticipated. "Are you certain?" With hesitation, the blonde asked. Makoto turned to face where the shinobi would come from and said, "Yeah, just go. I have a chance to give them another slip." Although it was a very slim chance, it was still there, so it was sufficient in her opinion. She tried to remember how many shinobi were pursuing them. If she had counted correctly, there were 7. 3 had been eliminated. They had lost 4 men. Perhaps they could have defeated them if their Jonin hadn't abandoned them. "Please just let Kushina know that I made her proud." The only thing she had to say, because there wasn't quite enough time for final remarks, was that the raven-haired person had mentioned her friend, her best friend. "Okay." She heard footsteps rustling and fading over the sound of the rain, wondering if some of the rock ninja would follow. Even though a lowly clanless shinobi was meek in comparison to her, they would likely want a powerful Kekkei Genkai and would take steps to ensure her capture. The idea of being captured still made her shudder with disgust. She would never be exposed to that or anything of that potential. It would bring shame to her clan for all time, and another village would be able to win her priceless eyes. She would destroy her own eyes and kill herself before she allowed that to happen, as was expected of her and all the Uchiha in the clan. They were not like the Hyuga clan, who were so afraid and self-conscious that they had to take precautions to keep their eyes from being captured. She quickly tied the bandage tightly around her face to help stop the bleeding gash so she wouldn't have to hold it any longer, and she quickly pulled out a bandage from her tool pouch after tearing a piece of her long sleeve and replacing the blood-soaked one on her wound. She was a little dizzy from her blood loss, but she made herself focus on buying time, and she opened her eyes to quickly scan her surroundings in order to help her come up with a plan. It seemed to her that fighting in the sea of trees would be a bad idea because, to her left, there was a small lake that was a few hundred meters in diameter. She was in a dense forest, and, if they had a sensory-type ninja, she might have used it to her advantage. A deeper section of the forest was to her left. Even if she just moved, they would still pursue them both. She began tossing kunai tied with paper bombs among the trees, making sure to use everything in her inventory, but she had to force herself to stand here. They couldn't hide, but she couldn't either, so she hurried onto the lake and had to entice the group that was pursuing into an open area. There were too many dangerous places for her to hide. She couldn't be blinded because that would make it easier for them to catch her. She could keep an eye on them in the open and use her eyes to reduce the likelihood that this would happen. Her chakra reserves were only about a fifth of their usual strength from the earlier scuffles and running, so she felt a trail of heat from the blood on her cheek and tried to slow her heart rate. Although she hadn't been left behind for very long, it felt like time had slowed to a crawl. It stayed afloat, thankfully, because it didn't need to move much anymore. They might lower their guard in such an open area, leaving them exposed. She grabbed her bottle to take a sip of water before another thought came to her. She wrapped her remaining paper bombs around the bottle before setting it where she thought they might land. Waiting was all that was required now. After a while, when you anticipate dying or are very close to dying, she began to reflect on any regrets she may have had. Her birthday was just 3 months away, so 16 wasn't a long life. The war accelerated her maturation, just as it did for everyone in her age group. What did she have planned for the future? A family. She guessed that was what she wanted later in life, to stay at home and take care of her children. She only considered serving her clan and village. it was unrealistic to expect a miracle. That's what Kushina wanted for herself, maybe another Uchiha, or someone powerful to protect them. Maybe that's what she wanted most, just happiness, in whatever form it came. Makoto laughed merrily. It's what most normal people wanted. Wars didn't accomplish that, it was easy to see that. She would actually have to survive here, stall them, and then make a desperate run for it in order to find happiness in her life. She waited to confirm the number, but her eyes caught movement in the trees, hiding behind trunks and the like. She only saw 4 of them. The others were either hidden behind the trees or were part of a backup unit in case they were all caught in a trap. She quickly activated the paper bombs in the trees and easily avoided a few shuriken and kunai thrown at her. The sound of faint sizzling inside the trees drowned out the rain, and they must have heard it too. The paper bombs were arranged in a boxed pattern to force them out of the trees, with a few inside the square, and she heard some explosions as she went through the hand signs. She saw 5 ninja emerge from the trees as she completed her hand signs, and she stalled, waiting for the one in the lake to explode. It would have been better if she had a field, but she had to settle for the lake. The water that stung her felt like debris thrown at her, and she lost sight of them with all the water that spurted out, but it didn't really matter because if she couldn't see them, then they couldn't either. They landed, and a geyser of water shot up through the air. In the direction of where 2 of them had landed, she unleashed her clan's signature fire-style technique, the Grand Fireball, making it larger than usual and feeling the drain on her. She wasn't sure whether she heard screams or not because the explosions and chaos dulled her hearing, and the heat of the flaming ball caused the rain and water to evaporate, creating steam that festered in the air. She heard the cries of pain from someone in the forest, somewhere in the trail of devastation she had caused with her fire technique and explosive tags, and only one person on the lake stood to face her before another broke the water's surface and got back up. She ignored it and concentrated on the 2 in front of her, who glared at her as the screams subsided and examined her closely while whispering to each other in a low voice. Their red clothing and the headband's emblem indicated that they were rock shinobi. There was still an unknown number missing from their group, she thought quickly as the screams subsided, and she assumed they were dead. She had taken down 2, and it appeared as though she might break free. I won't have much time until the rest arrive, she said, placing a trembling hand on the hilt of a kunai that was the result of adrenaline in her cold hands. She would have to remove these 2 and hope that one of them was the censor because there was no indication which one was. One of them appeared to be a jonin, and she was in her late 20s. She was not yet an elite ninja, so this would be a battle for her life, and they avoided staring into her eyes so she could not create an illusion among them. The Kenjutsu practitioner wasn't one of them, and she was unaware of the skills of the one in front of her. Another jonin will be coming soon. She would need to use her chakra extensively to have even a slim chance of surviving, and she didn't really stand a chance unless she managed to capture one with her genjutsu. Makoto couldn't hear the female jonin's commands over the sound of the rain in the distance, but it appeared that she had completed them. She saw the tensing in their arms and legs, which indicated that they were now forcing her to move, and she knew they had devised a plan based on their determined and malicious looks. The wait was agonizing, made worse by her tiredness and aching limbs. She was determined to stop their offensive, so she finished another set of hand signals, this time the phoenix flower. When she saw the jonin go through some hand signs, they halted. "Water style?" she asked. Her eyes caught the bullets forming from out of the wall and launching themselves at her with tremendous speed before she could react, and a torrent of water formed from the lake, protecting them from the fiery torpedoes. She turned and twisted, trying to avoid them, gasping in agony as one struck her shoulder, then launching herself away when another struck her ribs. She ignored the pain as she saw her Chunin opponent getting ready to kill her with a tanto he carried. When their eyes locked, she saved her own life by casting a genjutsu and landing a kick that sent him flying back. She decided that it was a fleeting opportunity to get away because she still needed to either give chase or break her companion out of the genjutsu, giving her a head start or a 1-on-1 deathmatch. She threw a few shuriken at the Chunin, which was easily deflected by that jonin with her own. She turned, running through the pain that pulsed in her abdomen, and winced at the pain that was concentrated around her ribs. Her attack may have broken some of them, but that didn't stop her from trying to flee. No, she frantically entered the forest and continued racing through as she prepared for an escape, keeping high in the branches to go faster, seeing a lot of movement within the trees to her right, being flanked and intercepted, her hopes dwindling, but at least she could try. She pulled some wire from her tool bag and tied it around shuriken and kunai, using her eyes to weave them together quickly, creating multiple pairs of wire connecting with shuriken. She was multitasking, making sure she was behind trees for cover so that no tools or techniques would catch her. She had a slight lead, but they would soon catch up. She knew and trusted her skills enough to know that they had fastened tight, so she paused, only to fire a few kunai at the base of a few trees, sinking in deeply before throwing their connecting shuriken along several other trees. The blonde guy with his shadow clone came to mind, and she formed it without hesitation. It would buy some valuable seconds, but it would be better with bait. Perhaps it was her low stamina, but her gamble had paid off, and her desperate need to survive had led her to make sacrifices, and she underestimated her chakra, feeling the precious remaining constantly drain with her use of the Sharingan, alongside the shadow clone. The clone formed beside her. With no time to waste, she began running as quickly as her legs would carry her. Her vision darkened, and she almost stumbled, but she was still conscious. She felt her eyes return to their typical onyx color. She didn't even realize someone had seized her, but eternal bliss told her to just give up and fall. Akira? Identifying the tangle of blonde hair and shape, what brought you back? I couldn't leave you behind, she said, and Makoto felt a second wind come to her as they began to run. She released the little support she had before gasping in surprise. A terrible howl of wind accompanied the ear. Splitting thunder. Like screeches that sounded behind them. She pushed Akira away with force, and she experienced a moment of weightlessness before her vision failed. She was in excruciating pain throughout her body, and every time she moved or felt her heartbeat, pain would flash. She wanted nothing more than to lie motionless, but her limbs would not follow her orders, and she could not even consider moving them. Her face throbbed, her vision was severely blurred, and the world shook before she finally realized where she was and what was happening. A blonde girl lay on the ground, two shapes hovering over her, and she could not remember who she was. The two tall figures spoke incomprehensible words. Akira? Makoto responded. The shinobi with the blade stood over her, and Akira gave a silent response. Makoto thought about their predicament and the danger they were in. As the sword rose above her and then fell, she felt pain flash in her eyes and watched as life slowly drained out of her, leaving her speechless and her dull eyes empty except for a husk. A new pain gripped the back of her head, and she struggled to even find coherence as she willed herself to try to stand, but before she could raise her face off the rocky terrain, the world almost vanished. Avoid. It's a Uchiha. As she fought for breath, she heard the muffled conversations. Am I? She asked herself, unable to let herself. I have to. No. She cried in agony as something pierced her leg. Her body stopped obeying her orders, her vision dimmed, and she was unable to even move her mouth to protest. She was thrown into emptiness. Standing on the surface of the water, he surveyed the wreckage that had been wrought. The smoke was easily recognizable, and he knew that the town where he had lost his headband was somewhere nearby. The rumbles he heard were unquestionably caused by paper bombs rather than thunder. A line of trees on the other side of the lake were bent from a technique, and smoke came from the area of woods where he had discovered two rock shinobi bodies. He remembered seeing something like this when he first took his Chunin exams. At the end of the line, he saw the body of Kunoichi. He had heard the commotion just a minute earlier, so maybe there was a chance she could be saved. He looked into the broken trees and discovered that they had been blown apart, uprooted, or broken by whatever force it was. Rushing to her, he flipped her to reveal her eyes were dead, and he saw the leaf symbol on her headband before a sizzle alerted him to the paper bomb on her torso, which he tore off on impulse, locating Kurama's chakra and extending the arm far enough away before it exploded. He exposed Kurama's head to shield him from the numerous tools after hearing the faint whistle of thrown tools. A few Fuma shuriken and kunai lightly pressed against his cloak before he dispelled it. He found himself surrounded by 6 shinobi, one of whom dropped a bound Kunoichi to the ground with reckless abandon. A brawl? He heard Kurama complain. Try not to be careless with chakra. Especially mine, both of our recovery times will probably not be the same again. Bastards, such a shady tactic, he said, disregarding Kurama's objections. They conversed among themselves, ignoring him. What on earth was that flash of yellow? Does he belong to the clan Hyuga? No, he doesn't have the eyes. Another kid, but still a shinobi, come to save the Uchiha. Shut up, let's take him out quick. He was outnumbered, so he would have to take the initiative to gain an advantage, and they moved against him as soon as he signaled to the shadow clone, resulting in a standoff while he watched each of them for any movement. He jumped to the closest one, but his kick was blocked, and then another of his clones entered, punching him in the face and knocking him to the ground. His clone then proceeded to engage another as he stepped on his opponent's knee, causing him to scream in agony as a loud snap was heard. He would live, but he wouldn't be fighting right now. He quickly created the Rasengan in his hand, recalled some lost shadow clones, and engaged in combat with large fists covered in rock. He then sped off in the direction of the biggest threat. As he was about to make contact, Naruto made a wall with his fist, almost blinding him. His Rasengan ground against the ground, and his defense was ineffective because the concussive force of his technique sent him vanishing into the dense forest. Another clone jumped after him to make sure he wouldn't get up, and there was the sound of many branches and twigs snapping. Another shinobi with a sword swung at him, and he saw a brief flash of movement overhead. He dodged, drawing out his father's kunai and parrying another quick blow, putting him on the defensive with quick blows that he would catch, and he could see the anger rising on his face. He was quick, but he faced faster opponents like the Raikages. He sliced through the folded steel with ease after channeling wind chakra and catching the katana between the kunai's blades. Naruto was taken aback and unbalanced, so he dropped his weapon and stabbed the Jonin in the arm. Naruto landed a kunai at his neck after he fell to the damp ground with a kicking sweep. He grunted, "Just do it already." All 5 shinobi and 1 kunoichi were either knocked out or subdued when Naruto looked around, and the most likely Leaf Shinobi's unconscious form was still where her captors had left her. "Nah, not what I'm here for," he said, getting to his feet and approaching the hostage without regard to his words. He ordered a shadow clone to carry his dead comrade while he unbounded the one at his feet because he was still a part of the Leaf and had the will of fire inside of him, so he couldn't just leave her there. His gaze led him to the other Leaf kunoichi. She was practically dead, her clothes were soaked, her skin was cold to the touch, her face was bruised and swollen, and her wounds didn't seem to be particularly fatal or deep. She lay in his arms, breathing faintly, but with bloodied bandages wrapped around her arm and along the length of her cheek. "Do you believe you can assist her, Kurama?" "Yeah, what I can do for her is nothing compared to the wounds I can heal for you," he responded. It was strange to see it happen. He grunted in recognition, channeled chakra through her, and a red cloak encircled her. He lifted the bandage covering her face and discovered that the gash was healing itself. Before remembering that she was the person he had fought on top of the roof, there was something familiar about her. It must have been quite late because it was much darker than it had been minutes earlier, and the endless sea of clouds didn't help with the light either. "Well, what a coincidence," he muttered, looking behind him at the shapes of writhing shinobi and ones cursing his village. In addition to the fact that he was wet, he always appeared to be wet, he would need to find some cover before nightfall. "Well," said Naruto, "this is awkward. Mainly because of the circumstances he was in." He took off the bloody bandages covering her arm and face and tossed them into the fire he had started. He left the damp headband next to her after untying it. Despite being unconscious, she was shivering, which suggests that she was suffering from hypotension. In any case, he was aware that she would perish if she couldn't find some warmth. When he unzipped the Uchiha's flak jacket, he noticed that the green vest was completely soaked, not just from water, and had bloodstains on it. The same could be said for her long, sleeved shirt and pants. He couldn't just abandon her in her drenched, filthy, frayed, and chilly clothing. During his journey, he happened upon a very small cave. The town where she was stationed was probably less than an hour away. The location was well concealed by the numerous bushes and trees that surrounded it. The cavern was only a few meters deep in the cliff they were in, and it was barely big enough to sit in. Naruto didn't think it was the best idea to walk through the night in his chakra form, which illuminated his position like a light bulb. He had only given her enough chakra to heal her wounds, and she was clearly still unconscious. Since their chakras were connected, she would always carry a fragment of Kurama's chakra with her. He had a small blanket with him, but the rest of his supplies were left with Konan and Yahiko. The girl was lying on the floor. Therefore, aside from the little fire that was brewing, he didn't have much to warm her. "Well, I have my raincoat and jacket." His jacket would conceal her petite figure, and his raincoat reached his knees. He would have to remove her drenched clothing just to ensure she wouldn't become ill or even die. Her flak jacket came apart when he lowered the zipper. He said, "I feel like a pervert now." Kurama interrupted, "Only if you think those thoughts are Naruto." "Well, it's clear that you're not helping." He sighed and made a shadow clone to go get firewood. To help it in the dark, he gave it a flashlight. The rain made it more difficult, so it would be some time before his clone actually found any. Screw it. He knelt over the girl once more before coming up with a fantastic idea. "Kurama. What are you looking for?" He said, "Do this for me," but all he got was silence before it responded. "You can't be serious." "I am." He would eventually do it, but he didn't want to think perversely or end up like his masters, who read adult fiction and snooped on women. "Just go fuck yourself," Kurama said. Kurama himself had a look of disbelief on its face, and Naruto found himself inside the seal where the fox was kept. "You're an asshole if you think I'll do that, especially for Uchiha." "Oh, hurry up. Isn't this the reason we're here? I mean, if we're going to change the Uchiha, we might as well start with one, right?" asked the blue-eyed man, in an attempt to persuade him. "Huh? Yes. But how is it going to help to undress a Uchiha? Well, for starters, she might get too cold and die. All you need to do is take off her wet clothes and put my jacket and coat on her. When he removed that garment and put it aside, he didn't hear Kurama's response, and he didn't answer any other words he said inside the seal. In fact, he was fairly certain that he was being deliberately ignored. "You're useless, Kurama, we're supposed to be partners," he was crying. He looked at the Uchiha, breathing shakily, her skin deathly pale and her lips blue, and she was still shivering. He sighed and got ready to focus, reaching into his little bag and pulling out a small blanket and towel for her to sleep on because they were better than the cold rock. He let out another sigh and lifted her torso, struggling to remove the flak jacket. He threw it aside and began working on her long sleeve, which was much harder to remove because of how tightly it fit her and the wet fabric that made it even more difficult. He sighed in exasperation as he noticed that she was wearing an undershirt, which was, predictably, soaked. He removed it and avoided staring at her while wearing only a bra. He held her awkwardly while he patted her torso dry with the towel, telling himself over and over again that nothing else would get wet except her wet bra, as he imagined the pervy sage saying, along with other suggestions. Even worse than before, Naruto positioned the blanket beneath her and his jacket underneath her so that she lay on top of it before removing her pants. He pictured the perverted sage explaining that this was the first time he had ever removed a girl's pants and that it still counted. Damn, he missed him, but why was he thinking about him all the time now? She was about his age, and he ignored the mounds on her chest that showed on his jacket. It was also fortunate that it went past her thighs, and wrapped his red jacket around her, zipped it up, and placed her wet clothes in a pile. The only thing he could do now was wait and keep an eye on her. "Thank God it's over," he said, pulling his raincoat over her for added warmth. He looked through his supplies and discovered only 2 rice balls and a half-filled water bottle. He would have to find supplies later because it was too dark to even search for a town at this time. Silver, long and sharp, the blade glinted in the light, casting shadows over her, and drops fell around her aching face as Makoto glanced up at the assailant before it fell. Her eyes snapped open in alarm, and she gasped as she saw the low, dark rocky ceiling, heard the thunder and rain, and heard a fire crackling to her right. "Wasn't I?" She was dry and warm, which was a much better feeling, and she could smell the musky smell of whatever she was covered in, which smelled like some kind of soup. She appeared to have taken off most of her clothes except for her underwear. For a brief moment, she was concerned, but she felt that her limbs were not bound as she had anticipated. Rather, she was placed in a red jacket, and when she turned to face the fire, she saw that the rest of her clothes were hung up next to it to dry. It was dark, with only the fire for light, and the distant sound of thunder or explosions could be heard. The fireplace was situated just outside the cave, out of the way of the rain that was falling. Strangely, she didn't feel as though she was about to die. She was unable to sense any of the stinging sensations from her wounds, and she felt nothing swollen or even the faint outline of a scar when she crept her hand up to her right cheek, where she had been slashed. But Makoto did feel weak, clumsy, and drained. She could only assume that she had been healed by someone skilled in medical ninjutsu, but medical ninja were few and only worked on life-threatening injuries and the like, and they were so overworked that they wouldn't bother with such a pointless task. If someone else couldn't do it, they would at most stitch it up. "You know you owe me. You realize how embarrassing it was to take you off?" It sounded dreadfully familiar, like a frightened Kushina, you know? A boy, or rather a young man, sat opposite her against the cave wall, his features partially illuminated by the fire flames, and she sat up, feeling tender and facing the direction of the voice. She swore that he had looked familiar, aside from the fact that he appeared to be Minato's long-lost brother, because he had the same blonde hair, blue eyes, and even facial shape as Minato, with the exception of the 3 whisker marks on his face. "Who are you?" she inquired. He appeared agitated, but it was obvious that she was not being held captive. He turned to the fire and said, Naruto. You saved me, then?" "Sure did. You're not too far from your base, I think," he said, showing her a comforting smile as he relaxed considerably. She remembered feeling so cold, and he was probably glad she didn't mention how he had undressed her, and he probably had good reason for it. "My name is Makoto Uchiha," Makoto said softly, shivering at the thought of what might have transpired. "Oh, well, thank you." He nodded, and she couldn't get rid of the thought that she ought to think of him. "I'm Naruto, as I mentioned." He appeared to be about to continue, but he stopped himself. "I'm an orphan, so yeah." Upon realizing that she had previously seen the vivid blue hue in his eyes, she attempted to activate her eyes with chakra but was unsuccessful. She calmed the slight pain that flared in her eyes because she was too exhausted to do so. "Are you hungry?" he inquired as she fumbled inside the little pack that had taken up residence next to him. Her stomach rumbled anguishedly, and she couldn't quite recall when she had last eaten. Yeah, she said, controlling herself as she took the canteen and 2 rice balls from him when she looked up. Thanks. For a few minutes, she ate in silence. She glanced at him, who appeared distressed as he kept staring at the flickering fire. So you're a shinobi, she said, taking bites out of her food every now and then. He yawned and said, you can say that. Whether the sun had already set or was still rising, she couldn't tell because the clouds were so dark. There was silence as Makoto tried to think of questions, a sneaking suspicion, but she would have to wait a bit before she could use her Sharingan. She thought of the orange pants, the person she had fought when he had infiltrated, and even the jacket looked vaguely familiar, like he was wearing now. It was pointless to accuse him outright on that basis. She only needed to see his chakra signature to know that he was no ordinary shinobi if he could simply outsmart and engage in head combat with some Jonin. If her rescue was any indication, he was capable. Why did you save me, then? She said. When she asked, he appeared truly taken aback. Why wouldn't I? I mean, you're not a leaf shinobi, she said, feeling foolish for asking directly without providing further information. After blinking a few times, his blue eyes answered, do I really need a good reason? I helped out because I saw someone in need. Makoto was able to come to a number of conclusions, some of which were quite negative. Makoto gazed into his blue-eyed boy's eyes, which conveyed feelings of isolation, remorse, annoyance, and despair. His troubled soul was no different from many others at this time, but his eyes also exuded confidence and unwavering resolve. Given how deeply they were rooted in the land, it is likely that he lived in the vicinity of these lands because she did not notice any colors or equipment that appeared to be connected to the other villages. You are aware of my origins, correct? Yup. The Hidden Leaf Village, the symbol on your headband, replied he. That? You're not bothered by that? To be honest, it's a little strange to see, she said. His amusement was evident in his expression as he laughed. Is it wrong to assist others? No, it's the opposite, he laughed easily. I'm more bothered by the war, but that doesn't have much to do with you, well you know what I mean. After finishing her rice ball and taking a sip of water, she remained silent and looked out at the freezing rain, which she detested seeing again. May I ask you a question? Did he ask? Go ahead. Do you want to finish the mission or save someone from your village? Since he appeared sufficiently innocent, she said, I feel like I'm being interrogated. I didn't mean it that way, you know. He blushed. It reminded her of Kushina, and it made her smile, even a little. Her mind went to her friend Akira, who had died. Sorry, I guess I'll stop there, he replied. I was just curious about a few things. You can go ahead and ask them, you did save me after all. He remained silent before saying, never mind, it would have been a terrible joke. Then he became more serious and empathetic, saying, I buried the other kunoichi that was with you. Her throat constricted slightly, but she pushed it away. Where? Just outside, you'll see the grave. Her headband is on top of it, he responded. The little energy she had left her feeling as though the world was on top of her, even though she wanted to see it. You appear quite exhausted, and your clothes are still drying, so you are free to get more sleep if you'd like. Uninterested in continuing the conversation, she nodded, flipped the hood over her face, and lay back down. As Naruto stepped out of the forest shelter and onto the road, he noticed the remarkably faint smoke rising from the town he was approaching. Even though he was only a clone, he was supposed to get extra food for Makoto and the real him, but it didn't seem like he could do that when he saw the devastation in front of him. A small wall obscured the town's view, and as he got closer to the entrance, he was informed of its current state. A nearby post that he thought would have contained the town's name was demolished. He walked towards the entrance, and even though the wall blocked most of the view of the village, he could guess the destruction of the town with all the smoke and dust in the air. The town was surrounded by a small wall, merely to keep out common bandits or wildlife, and most of the sections were cracked and falling apart, either by time or, most likely, the war. In the street he saw, a building had been demolished, and bodies were scattered all over it. He reached for the entrance, inhaled deeply, and entered the gate when he heard a noise to his right and saw someone running around the corner away from him. According to his memory of the map, the town was small and didn't appear to be a target. He wasn't very knowledgeable about planning, of course, but it didn't appear to be a key location. It did absolutely nothing to save it. He went around the town, mostly to see if there was anything left scavenging for the original, but also to see if he could be of assistance to anyone, if they wanted it. He waited for a long while before he was sure that no one was trapped inside the town, which was a chaotic mess with several buildings completely destroyed, rubble littering the streets, a building collapsed nearby, and dust strewn into the air, further polluting it. He didn't consider whether there might be more bodies inside the collapsed buildings as he passed a number of bodies lying on the sides of the roads. Scavengers appeared to be searching everywhere but running away as soon as they saw anyone. He could see who was causing this chaos, and he even saw the bodies of the shinobi who were attacking, joining the rain ninja who were protecting their homes. The town was almost empty, but he kept hearing noises the closer he got to the center of town, so he decided to get a glimpse and see what was going on. Leaf shinobi, he thought, climbing up a building to see if he could get a glimpse of the noise, which sounded like orders being shouted, as he saw the familiar forest green flak jackets coming in from the east side of town. The majority moved slowly to avoid being caught in an ambush, and he estimated that there might have been 100 of them. They must have been pushed back, he said, implying that the majority of the civilians had been evacuated. This was enough for him, so he turned around and headed west to see if he could get any supplies before the time limit expired before returning to the cave. Since he was only a clone, he was not really in danger, but he didn't want to confront anyone from his hometown, so he immediately separated himself from the advancing invaders and looked for any markets that might have supplies of food or equipment. Even though it was short, he thought of all the members of the Alliance as comrades, and even if the Alliance didn't yet exist, he couldn't shake the idea. He had fought and bled with the allied shinobi, fighting together to fight an evil, to protect themselves, and to protect their homes. When he heard a scream, he turned to face the noise, which appeared to be close by, and walked to the approximate spot, overhearing conversation. Cease. He heard a man. Take off. Naruto attached himself to the side of the two-story building after hearing another person say something that led him to believe that the other person was his accomplice. Please don't. As he approached the corner, he heard a woman's plea and looked down to see 3 people in an alleyway. A brown-haired woman, 2 meters up the path, was cowering against the wall, terrified for her life, while a dead person, face down, stood at her feet. Unaware that he was there, Naruto saw the backs of the 2 men who were standing in front of the woman, one of whom was holding a kunai in his hand while the other held him back. What are they doing here? He asked, watching the events unfold and waiting to intervene. The person with the kunai, who had a green Chunin flak jacket and a bandana on his head, said, "They're just civilians." The other one, who was also wearing the green flak jacket, said icily, "I don't care." Naruto felt his fists clench painfully. What if we are sought after by the enemy? The man wearing a bandana inquired, while the other man merely chuckled in jest. He shook off the hand that was attached to him roughly and threatened, saying, "They're all gone, and more of us coming here. So fuck off unless I need to teach you a lesson too." "You can't do this," he said to the man wearing the bandana, who shrank from the glare he gave him before bracing himself again. "And, how are you going to respond to this?" Naruto turned to face the man, his muscles tense, aching for action and relief, his heartbeat quickening with every second. "Come on," Naruto pleaded as the man wearing the bandana glanced back and forth between the 2 men. The Chunin turned away and left the alleyway, saying, "I can't watch this." The man with the kunai turned back to the woman after Naruto heard her whimper, and he watched breathlessly as the other ninja turned the corner and began running south. Coward, he thought, glancing down at the man who was slowly approaching the sobbing woman. It didn't work with him to stand by and watch helplessly as an innocent person was being threatened, whether or not he was from the leaf. A small splash from the puddle alerted the man below, and Naruto leapt down, sending him flying with a roundhouse kick to his side. He made sure the brunette was behind him to shield her from the man getting up for the first time, but the woman was too terrified to move despite his suggestion to run. Looking at the shinobi in front of him, Naruto asked himself, why is he doing this? He recognized the Hidden Leaf Ninja's Chunin flak jacket as the headband's symbol. What in the world are you doing? He saw the expression in his eyes as he tried not to yell. The person said, "It's their fault, but I don't have to answer to you." He had a sly smile on his face, the same kind of smile he had seen in the past from some Akatsuki members. Pleasure in causing harm to others. "I can't just." He gritted his teeth in frustration as he felt the negative emotions of the person in front of him, the urge to kill. The man reached for a kunai and aimed it at him. Naruto examined the body of the young man who had been stabbed earlier, which had several crimson stains that had guttered out. "You're next, kid." He knew what he had to do, justice, when he saw the dead man at his feet. He looked at the man who was about to attack and prepared to use his elemental nature to channel his father's kunai. The man charged, obviously underestimating his opponent. It lasted just a second. As the man's head fell off him, Naruto took a deep breath, ignored the thud and sickening sounds as the body fell back onto the wet concrete, and focused on the rain to drown out the sound before turning to the girl to divert his attention from what he had done. Leaning over the man's body, the woman was whimpering and holding onto his coat. He approached her, but she ignored him, and he could feel the negative emotions leaking out of her as well as the many that were coming from the east and south. She didn't care to answer for another second. All he got was a faint nod. She touched the young man's face, letting out a little cry, and he turned away to give her privacy as she said her silent goodbyes. "We need to go before more come," he said without emotion. He heard her fumbling, saw her holding a backpack, and pulled the hood of her coat over her face. He trailed off, saying, "I'll make sure you're safe until." "Thank you," she said humbly, continuing to stare at the floor. She walked past him and out of the alleyway, and he followed her without turning around, making sure to remain vigilant as they headed for the western exit. Fortunately, there were no more incidents, and the walk outside took only a few minutes. He calmed down a bit and walked silently with her, deciding to keep her safe until she found others, and they continued on the road farther into the country. The distraught woman said nothing else, and he left her alone. He was shocked, not because of what he had done, but because he was confused and knew he would have to kill, as well as because of the bad feelings he was experiencing. The allied shinobi were more unique, but he still felt their emotions. Some were similar, but different, but he kept his focus on the clones. During the war, Naruto felt that the white Zetsu all felt the same, clones. The other villagers were different, the people he fought with. It was distinct, because there were many of them. The man was nothing more than a monster, and what shook him up was that his senses were unreliable enough to not be able to distinguish between the monsters, who were nearly identical to one another. The things he felt from the man were not much different from those of those who suffered, who wanted retribution, and who were in pain. He secretly hoped he would be able to distinguish it once he was more comfortable with it. After wandering with the girl until a caravan appeared, Naruto left without saying anything to her. Thinking back on his dream, he pondered how he was going to accomplish it, the lengths he would go to, his mission to bring about peace through understanding, but he didn't care because he was only a shadow clone. He remembered what Nagato had told him. This war was about money, that's all. Its existence was terminated by a puff of smoke. This time, it was brighter, and she could see farther into the cave they were in, or, more accurately, how tiny it was, ending only 3 feet in front of her. She awoke blearily, not feeling much better than when she had woken up the last time, and it didn't help that she had had trouble falling and staying asleep, because every time she did, she saw the bastard's sneer of cruelty. Makoto eyed Naruto, who appeared more troubled than exhausted, and she almost said why, but she didn't know him well. His eyes seemed to be focused, as if he were in a trance of some kind. It stopped raining for once, but, unsurprisingly, the dark clouds still hung over the landscape, with the occasional thunder roaring in the distance. She used to enjoy the rain, the thunder, and the lightning. It was a beautiful sight to behold while she sat at home, protected by her home. Instead of bothering him, she looked outside. It would only serve to remind her of her previous location. Naruto appeared to finally emerge from his meditative trance, though perhaps he was simply dozing off. She moved, her hand reaching for the folded clothes she thought were hers. When he saw her reaching for her clothes, he appeared to be agitated once more. "Oh, he said, "I'll just give you some privacy, you know." She couldn't help but smile again as he emerged from the cave, and she trusted him that he had only done what he had done, as well as the fact that he was actually uncomfortable about the whole thing. Hypothermia was a good enough excuse, and neither she nor he brought it up. She put on her clothes, which smelled of smoke, but it was better than nothing else. Finished? He stood somewhere out of sight and asked. "I am," she answered. She saw a pot of boiling water by the fire, and he came back, sitting himself back in his usual position as he rummaged through a new bag he had acquired. "I don't know about you, but I need something to lift my spirits. For that, ramen is always helpful." I would like that." The mere thought of food made her stomach rumble. Naruto grinned broadly. They were only permitted to build fires at their extended camp, so anything hot was a luxury. She was a part of scouting runs, so the simple prepared meal made her mouth water. Even the company she was assigned to struggled to get food, and their convoys were lost due to various issues they had faced, including guerrilla warfare tactics that destroyed their supply lines. A war could not be sustained if supplies were constantly being stolen or lost, but they were still involved. Food was limited as a result. Small amounts were provided, barely enough to support them, and they had turned to stealing food from mostly deserted houses. Stores were scarcely stocked, relocated, and removed from the war zones, so the only option was to steal them. When the boiling water was poured into the cup, she could smell the spices, and her stomach ached. The smell was familiar. In fact, it smelled just like the jacket he was wearing at the time. "All right, now we just have to wait a minute, do we have to?" she answered. "Yup. Otherwise the flavor and texture of the noodles just isn't as crisp and tasty." She laughed and let out a breath through her nose. "Why do you like your ramen so much?" "Well," She was shocked when he actually took her question seriously when she was merely engaging in small talk because she really didn't think he would respond, and people typically enjoy their own food simply because it's tasty. I believe that because I was passing by when this man saw me. With a smile on his face, he asked if I wanted to enter. Even though I was a little anxious, I went ahead. Saying it was free, he set a bowl of piping hot ramen in front of me. I mean, people didn't really do that kind of thing for me, he said, laughing uncomfortably. They simply ignored me. Thus, perhaps that's it. That was sweet of him to do, she thought to herself, although it didn't feel particularly significant to him. It sure was. Okay, it's ready now. It felt like years since she had something like this, something hot and flavorful, so perhaps he wasn't so full of shit after all. She was given her own utensils to use, and he gave her some food, which she also appreciated. It was a satisfying meal to say the least, and she even drank the accompanying broth after finishing the noodles. I felt better after that. How about you? A bit, was her response. Then it's good enough. She recognized his voice at that moment, recalling her thoughts from yesterday and her suspicions about him. She pushed chakra into her eyes, and her Sharingan came to life. She felt the drain of her chakra, but it was sufficient to know that it was him that she had fought above the rooftop. Breathlessly, she said, It's you. Well? Oh, Naruto said, I kind of assumed you already knew. A scouting group probably wouldn't have much of an issue if he could elude a whole contingent of shinobi, so it was no surprise how she was actually saved. She was genuinely at a loss for words. Where's my blade? She inquired. Oh, I see. When I got the ramen, I actually forgot to grab it. That was self-centered of me, you know, he said with a nervous laugh. He didn't appear to be particularly dangerous based on what he knew about him thus far. He was friendly, a little awkward, and, in fact, just normal. He didn't hurt any of the Leaf Shinobi directly. Could you tell me what became of the people who killed my team? She inquired. As if it bothered him, he became serious and said, I let them live. She swallowed the lump in her throat and tried to talk herself out of cursing him, telling herself that she had given her a chance to exact revenge on a friend. You know what that man did? The one with the sword? As he chopped down my friend, he grinned. I was kind of afraid of that, he said, looking out without saying anything. Who are you? A pacifist. You are neither a rock nor a leaf shinobi. Why didn't you murder anyone, then? Before he could speak clearly, he muttered something unintelligible. I have a goal. It's for the sake of peace. Calm, she almost spat. With a war raging, he wasn't accomplishing much. Yes, I do have people who rely on me. I aim for it because killing people won't get me very far. I am aware that some people simply take pleasure in hurting other people or seeking retribution. I don't think it's the best course of action, no matter how justified they may feel. I'd like to break that cycle. She couldn't shake the feeling that some of it was aimed at her, and she was cut off before she could say anything. Believe me, I understand your feelings. Such a thing was almost impossible for me. In fact, it was probably one of the most difficult things I have ever done. She chose not to say anything more because she didn't feel like arguing with her savior, and she didn't necessarily have to agree with him because he seemed so quiet when he said that. With a sigh, he said, Do you want another cup of ramen? She nodded docilely, concealing her blush. Naruto gave her privacy when she crossed the grave to where he buried her friend, so it was only right that he escorted her back. He pulled out his map and tried to find the town, relying on his memory of the roads he had traveled, assuming it was the one that was at least an hour away. He ran a hand through his damp hair, the rain this time not heavy but rather misty. He could continue, with the same level of alertness, but he didn't get any sleep because he was exhausted, worried about not finding Nagato, and bothered by what had happened the night before and his unbroken night watch. In any case, Makoto clutched her headband in her hand, seemingly finished saying goodbye to her friend. This is the location, correct? He asked, and she glanced at the map while he gazed at her. He couldn't help but wonder, did she have anything to do with the coup? She seemed like a decent enough person, but he wasn't the same person he was the year before, and he knew that people change. She said, That's it. It wasn't exactly a casual occasion, but she wasn't particularly talkative either. Ready? Makoto replied with a nod. So they started running, jumping into the trees with ease, from one tree branch to another, and since he hadn't spoken to the fox in a long time, he needed someone to talk to. Hi, Kurama. In any case, how did we get to the land of rain? He was a little taken aback by the question, but he had never given it much thought before. Instead, he had simply accepted it and tried his best to deal with it. I thought you knew this, only the possibility of dying. He felt that it was worth it and that he couldn't just turn his back on it when there was even the remotest chance. What has surprised me? Kurama grimaced, though not maliciously, but his remark didn't stop him from clarifying. It might have been the method, which, as you are aware, incorporates time and space. However, the method was never put to the test. Perhaps we simply happened to end up somewhere at random. Something like the moon. Yes, that means we can't trust it, he growled with determination. We wanted to go where when you were born and we ended up almost a decade back. Add to that we somehow ended in this fucking country that doesn't seem to stop raining. He noticed that animals, such as cats, disliked getting wet, but he couldn't quite understand why he was complaining. It wasn't like he was getting wet. Kurama interrupted his thoughts, pointing out that a fox was more like a dog. We may wind up in the sky or stranded somewhere far from the elemental nations, so we can never use it again. We know from our one use that it works, so the answer is yes. We are also aware that it is untrue. Perhaps we were simply fortunate, but I don't want to go all the way back to a time before the old man, when you humans were even more stupid and worthless than you are now. Therefore, we cannot afford to use it once more. His ramblings gave him some amusement, so he chose to ignore them and respond, well, good thing that we won't fail then, right? He laughed until he realized that he was being insulted, in a general way. He received a grunt in return. Other than that, Kurama's idea was constructive. After 20 more minutes of running, he realized Makoto was really slowing down and appeared to be having trouble breathing in order to keep up with the pace. Damn, gotta pay more attention, he said. She wasn't displaying it now, but she was obviously having trouble breathing, so he stopped before anything could happen. He leapt to the grass below, and Makoto joined him in bewilderment. He had no idea what her normal skin tone was, but she was probably paler than usual, and she had lost a lot of blood the day before, probably more than he had noticed. The statement, "You're dizzy, aren't you?" was more than just a question. What? She let out a gasp. You lost a lot of blood, I don't. Breathlessly, she said, I can keep going. Okay, he said, wondering what would happen if they continued. He leapt to the top of the branch, and she appeared to pause before joining him. She stepped on him, then staggered and appeared to be about to pass out, but Naruto caught her before she fell off. Yeah, you sure look like you can. Her breathing was labored as she noticed a drop of perspiration running down her face. Just give a few minutes, she said. I didn't get you any blood, so I don't think that will make a difference. You're weak, breathing is difficult, and you appear paler than normal, I believe. He was further supported by the fact that she heaved heavily a couple of times. Maybe I could carry you. She just gave him a look before attempting to stand as proudly as she could when he asked. Aren't I standing? Barely, he replied. There was the Uchiha pride she had. Were they all like this? But then again, Neji was like this too. How could he bring her down a notch? He didn't want to put her life in danger by witnessing her extremes. He leapt down below, and she followed again, looking determined and eager to try to keep up. What are we doing? Just a stroll through the forest, he said, placing his arms and hands behind his neck and beginning at a leisurely pace. In a nation ravaged by war? That sounds like a great idea, she remarked mockingly. So does running with the way you are. We can get there much quicker if we ran. He agreed that he didn't want to walk, but this was amusing enough on its own, akin to obnoxious Sasuke from Team 7. Well, how about you leave? I take it you know the way? I wouldn't be able to protect myself, was her next sentence, which was so quiet he could hardly hear it. She turned away. Perhaps Makoto and Sasuke were a little different, though, as he would never have acknowledged it and might have even played down the fact that he was also not in a rush. At her confession, he couldn't help but smile. Is walking a bad idea? Yes, it is, but what could be more stylish? I'm carrying you unconscious, or you're strolling through town in style. You wouldn't, they would know you were the one who infiltrated them. Remember that I had my own shadow clones? As they continued to move slowly, she didn't respond and didn't appear any better. In fact, she appeared as though she might pass out right there. He was about to accept her offer to begin their run, but he was already exhausted from walking, so perhaps a different strategy was required. You look like shit, you see, as if you were going to die. Allow me to transport you to a real medic ninja. Hell, I swear that I will never discuss this with anyone. You're not going to tell anyone? Remember, I don't really know any of your pals, do I? Makoto remarked, I suppose that makes it okay. He thought it was good enough, and he would have just grabbed her and put up with whatever she had to say. So he grabbed her legs and carried her bridal style, and she gasped in shock as her arms encircled his shoulders. What? Why am I unable to ride on your back? Why? What's the difference? I'm still carrying you. He glanced at her, her face directly in front of him, and for some strange reason, she appeared a little embarrassed. You know, that's not it. Never mind. She was almost weightless in his arms, so he shrugged and leapt across the treetops once more, deciding to pick up the pace significantly, faster than he was with an injured person. The scenery was essentially the same, with dark clouds and rain covering almost everything. There were many rock formations, but other than that, it was rather boring to look at anything. It wasn't difficult to see that occasionally she would glance at him before turning her attention elsewhere. They still had 30 minutes to go. So maybe the only thing that was interesting was him. "Are you aware of my dislike? Showering is actually impossible," Makoto remarked. "You don't like taking showers?" "Yes, I know it's a kind of weird thing to talk about, but it's a bit awkward like this. Uncomfortable. I don't think it's that strange. Consider it like taking a shower every day." "So, are we expected to remain silent the whole time?" Since they were already soaked, it didn't really matter that the rain increased again. At least he had a rain jacket. "While we're like this too," she said, looking ahead. "What? How about it? Never mind, but if you count taking a shower in ice-cold water with the floor being mud and no soap, then that's your thing," replied she. A smile tugged at his lips, but all this talk about showers was really starting to get to him. It didn't help that he had a better idea of her appearance, whether it was the extra muscle the pervy Sage had been referring to or any of the many perverted innuendos he had. He said it because he thought it was true. "Gotta look at the bright side, that's really all I can do." "It's a nice viewpoint. I sure hope so. I'm sure lots of people will disagree." He didn't bother to ask her opinion, but it might have been somewhat positive. "I'm sure," she said, falling silent. It took her a long time to start talking again, but he was feeling pretty good about it, and he enjoyed talking to her. It was good to find someone his own age. "Are you merely acting kindly out of compassion?" "Sure am. You don't want a prize of some sort?" She gave a perplexed response. He missed the old pervert and felt a little sad that he wouldn't be remembered, but now wasn't the time to be thinking about a scene that Jiraiya made him read. "No need for one. A pacifist, then?" "Oh, not precisely," he muttered. "You're a native, helping out someone who's a part of invading this country." It was home, after all, and he did not tell her that he was a member of the Hidden Leaf, and that he still thought of himself as one. "I find that inspiring. Please, let's resume our conversation about showers, or anything at all. Really, it was nothing." She nodded and smiled slightly. He had tried to lift her spirits by telling her that she had lost a friend, which reminded him of Hinata and Shikamaru, who had extended the same courtesy to her. He had lost nearly everything he had, and he had no idea where Killer B might be. He swallowed a lump in his throat and hurried through the forest while chatting absently with Makoto. With the sound of loose mud and dirt beneath his feet, he arrived at the road and saw a sign that read the town where she was stationed. "I believe it would be wise for you to walk the remaining distance, so your own people don't unintentionally attack us." Good thinking. As he disappointed her, he slowed to a crawl and then yawned again, feeling as though he should sleep or take a nap, not like during the war when his adrenaline was constantly pounding, and then there were the side effects of time travel. They soon encountered a patrol, and a group of 4 shinobi surrounded them after emerging from the underbrush. "Who are the two of you?" A Jonin commanded. "I noticed that one of you is a kunoichi of the Leaf. Serial number 009877. I was a part of Jonin Akio's scout squad." "Akio's team? Did they not disappear? That dossier is where?" As they waited, their captain inquired, and the shortest person next to him handed him a little notepad, which he turned through a few pages. "The correct serial number belongs to Makoto Uchiha. Like other Uchiha, demonstrate to us how your Sharingan is activated in a brief MIA." He saw her standing next to him, her Sharingan swung to life like a tomo, indicating that her eyes were still developing. The Jonin gave him a glare while nodding. However, you are not a part of the Leaf Village," he said in a serious tone. "He saved my life, but he's not," Makoto answered. "He was just escorting me." The Jonin glanced at her before turning to face him. The Jonin answered, "Then this is as far as you go." He shrugged, saying, "I might want to get her some blood though, I wasn't able to do that." She looked much better than she had before, and she was no longer having trouble breathing. "Just because you saved her doesn't mean you'll get rewarded." He unhooked the small pack on his back, which contained some ramen cups, and shrugged again, seeing the annoyance on the Jonin's face as his expression hardened. There was a moment of surprise when he winked and said, "Here's your stuff, Makoto." He couldn't offer the rest to another ramen lover, though it was more likely that she was hungry. He preferred the other idea. "Thanks," she said, carrying the little bag. He turned around and cautiously walked back into the forest, making sure not to disturb the Leaf Shinobi, waving, "See y'all later." He wanted to find Nagato in order to locate his perverted master, the Toad Sage Jiraiya. He really wanted a comfortable place to sleep, not to go looking for Nagato any farther. Therefore, it took him a while to arrive at the cave where Konan and Yahiko stayed. Since there was still plenty of food and they could take care of themselves, he was okay with them remaining alone. There was nothing nearby, so he went around another small group of houses that appeared to have been raided. The lack of sleep was wearing him down, so when he finally made it, he was relieved. Yahiko and Konan were eating lunch when he walked in. Then Yahiko said, "Oh, you're back?" He nodded before approaching them, grabbing some bread, a handful of berries, and some water to drink. "Well, I'm just gonna sleep for a bit, been up for too long." Konan answered, "Good night, I guess." Otherwise, he fell asleep before his head hit the pillow after plopping down on his bed. Another grating nudge on his shoulder roused him from his slumber. He murmured, 5 more minutes. For now, it ceased, before beginning again shortly after. "It's been 5 minutes now, was it really over so quickly?" Groggily, he asked, "What is it?" "There's another boy here, with his little dog." When he opened his eyes, he saw the girl with the blue hair kneeling before him. Who? His mind was racing so fast that he was easily awakened. Nagato, and his dog Tiny. For some reason, his mind went blank. A tiny dog? No, his name is Tiny. He laughed and shook his head, possibly in a mix of excitement and mild disbelief. He sat up and noticed the boy with the red hair. With his untidy red hair, the Rinnegan was out of sight. A small dog nuzzled in his lap as he sat with his legs crossed. They were both munching on a piece of bread. Naruto asked, "Someone else to help us?" When Nagato looked up, his eyes were barely visible through his hair. Sorry," he asked. Naruto gave a grin. "Well, you're here, right? If you're gonna stick around, then you gotta be willing to help us." With what?" Naruto was surprised by how timid his voice sounded. It was low and almost afraid. It was a long time since he had last seen him. When would he start making jokes, he wondered. As he bit into the piece of bread, the tiny puppy yelled in his lap. He remained silent as Yahiko started talking. "Oh, steal food, train, bring peace, nothing too hard." "Peace? How?" Yahiko decided. "How about one step at a time? First, we need to find a teacher, someone powerful. Naruto, the oldest one here, knows how to fight and he says he could teach us a few things." Nagato gazed at him. The curtain of hair concealed any emotion. "You guys are friends?" "Yeah, want to join?" "Okay, great," Naruto exclaimed with a joyful clap of his hands. "Now, how about we get you started?" In the initial weeks after Nagato's arrival, they all picked things up quickly. As naturally as they could, they were all able to access their chakra. He had become stuck on the subject of what to teach them next. There were a lot of lost details from the Hazy Academy days. He could teach them how to use hand signals. The diagrams had already been drawn by him with the proper placements. He was still a little slow, but his writing was improving. It looked nice, at least. "Here, learn these hand signs," he said, passing each of the papers he had made to them. Yahiko turned the paper over and over as he studied it. His eyes were attempting to interpret the drawing. What's this supposed to be?" "Like I said, hand signs." Konan was holding another and turning it around. "Naruto, I don't want to be mean but..." Yahiko interrupted, saying, "It's kind of crap." He was appalled, and as he took the diagram, his sense of artistic pride vanished, revealing the drawing's actual appearance. It was absolutely terrible. Then he thought of Sai. God, fuck him for being both. "What? I'm a shinobi, not an artist," he exclaimed. As he removed his drawings from them, he complained. Yahiko's derisive smirk and Konan's empathetic expression. When he recovered or found some, Nagato grumpily responded to his question about when they would learn. It was a few days later when Naruto was looking at their remaining supply. There wasn't much left to last more than a few days. He was the one who had gathered the food, mostly stealing but occasionally working for a few pieces. Yahiko and Konan had been receiving their own as well. Getting supplies was also a fun little exercise in shinobi techniques. Quickness, deceit, and stealth. Other people, perhaps, but they were impossible to think of. Then it occurred to him that he might as well make plans. Yahiko inquired, "So, you want to put this into some sort of game?" Naruto answered, "Mission, you can call it." He picked up a stack of papers, which contained only a few listings of shops, vendors, and other items. Both went hand in hand with a list of necessary supplies. Certain products were more challenging to find, and some establishments were more challenging to enter covertly. He had dispatched a few shadow clones to observe the handling of the stores. Some had an employee watch their stock, or they watched it themselves. A guard was stationed at a few, though, and they were unquestionably more watchful than the typical worker. He said rather awkwardly, "Let's see, you have 20, 4 hours, I'll be watching, and I'll grade it? I guess? Konan said, sounding uncertain. You don't sound so sure of this. He'll probably need to come up with some kind of system, because I don't really know how to much of this. Nagato said, so you want us to collect these stuff on here? Sure do. Some of them are harder than others, but you'll get a better grade. The easier places to get into will get you less points. Get the supplies. Damn, that seemed odd to say at all. He did not think of himself in the same way as the pervy sage, Iruka, Kakashi, or others. But he could be like that, too, if an old pervert man could be like that. Yahiko frowned and said, wouldn't we do better if we taught how to be a shinobi? The question nearly stumped him, but fortunately his quick thinking saved him. Yeah, but I also want you to see how much better you'll be when you do. Besides, I want to see your instincts and stuff. Oh, I guess that makes sense, he hoped it did. Nagato whispered, how will you keep track of us? A shadow clone appeared next to him as he smirked and made such a familiar seal. With this, I could keep track of all you. All right, so get started, I'll be keeping watch. Also, I'll be grading you alone, individually, the slightly younger one said, gazing at him in wonder. They didn't need to know that Naruto would probably fail them if they didn't act together. He observed them hurrying to fill their empty bags with supplies, rain gear, and other snacks for their robberies. Naturally, they wouldn't have to turn to small time theft once they were ninja. Although he didn't specify whether they could work in groups or alone, he followed them into town and gave them complete freedom to do as they pleased. They engaged in idle conversation until the village's gates appeared. He was a little disappointed that they began working alone after they all dispersed, but maybe that would change in time. He followed Nagato and his dog Tiny, sending 2 more shadow clones to observe the others' progress. Nagato ignored the list and started heading right away. He underwent a metamorphosis and was kept out of Nagato's line of sight. The red-headed man occasionally glanced around, probably wondering if anyone could see him. He proceeded down a crowded street that led to a marketplace. It was most likely the easier locations to steal from. Since it wasn't very crowded today, some challenges might arise. Nagato surveyed the area and cautiously approached more crowded areas, his devoted dog trailing behind. Before bending down to his dog, he apparently counted the amount of money he had in his pocket. Words that were not heard were exchanged with his dog. He approached a vendor, a woman who wasn't particularly menacing but also didn't appear weak. Before he removed some ryo from his pocket and before a glimmer of warmth emerged, he was looked at suspiciously. Baked goods wrapped in sealant were being sold by the vendor herself. After giving the woman the ryo for one, Tiny went up to her and licked her feet to get her attention. Nagato swiped a few more and pocketed it while she was briefly distracted by giving a few pets. Nagato called for Tiny and was on his way, but the woman didn't know it. A few minutes later, he began to think of a clone. It concerned Yahiko, who had been escorted out of a store by a staff member for clearly attempting to steal something. After receiving a reprimand, he triumphantly left with a fuel canister that he had concealed, in some way. Memories of Konan, who had been pickpocketing people who were strewn about in crowded places, came to mind shortly after. She had almost been apprehended, but she managed to get away with lying by claiming that they had dropped their money. As he went over them, he said, although it wasn't flawless, they weren't yet shinobi. Furthermore, it wasn't exactly the longest period of time since they began their mission. With a few supplies crossed off the list, it was a good beginning. He would just keep on observing. When Nagato was flung to the ground after being caught stealing, he felt sorry for him. That was all there was to it, and he didn't need to get involved. He didn't want them to rely on him, but he also didn't think he should get involved because they were capable of taking care of themselves. With a black eye already developing from the impact, Konan applied a cold, damp cloth to the side of her face. That had put an end to her pickpocketing rampage. For today, anyway. When Yahiko had to flee from an irate owner, he misplaced his raincoat, so his clothes were soaked. Although he didn't grab as many supplies as the others, Nagato was the least affected. Speaking of which, if they ate little more than the bare minimum, they had enough to last several days, from a single day of assembling, robbing, and purchasing. Even saying, well, you got until tomorrow until I give your grades, was extremely strange. He might not want to give as such. Fuck, this whole thing was strange in the first place. I'll just be outside, alright? After gathering a few things, he went outside where a tree protected him from the light rain. He took a seat, but at the moment, he wasn't sure what to do. So he pulled out his favorite tool from his tool bag. It counted even though it was one of the few books he had ever read. A Tale of Gutsy Shinobi, in copy form. Its age was indicated by the wear and tear from use. Before he left, he had discovered it in a store. The first one he had owned had been at his master's memorial. Since arriving here, he had already read it through again. Doing it again wouldn't be a bad idea. Naruto? Nagato's quiet voice interrupted him as he was reading. Yo, he answered. What's up? He asked, closing his books and turning to face Nagato, who was standing in the rain. He paused for a moment before continuing. I was wondering. You look like you know what you're doing, like you have everything figured. He answered, I seem that way, huh? Do you mean you don't? He gave his neck a gentle rub. Sort of, trying to achieve peace seems kinda hard, doesn't it? Nagato muttered, yes, but it's nice to think about. He grinned. Sure is, especially right now. You see, I try to do it in steps. First, I need a team with similar goals. And we're a team, but you need us to be trained. Exactly, was his response, and Nagato merely nodded as the silence continued. So what if you don't know? How would you find the steps? He didn't believe he was talking about his difficulties deciding what to teach or how. Well, you find it of course. According to Nagato, just like that. He put his hands around his throat. Well, depending on what you might be looking for, it might be easy, it might be hard. One day, though, you'll find it if you keep looking. It's what I think. Oh. Okay, was Nagato's response as he stood in the rain, seemingly not bothering to move. He made the decision to speak once more. Do you know what a nindo is? It's about what a ninja follows. Actually, there's already one, like how you're supposed to be a weapon for your country, but never mind that trash. Anyways, I have one. Never going back on my words, and I know for sure that I'll follow through every single one. So that means peace is involved in that. Nagato nodded gratefully, looking surprised. However, something else caught his attention. To the south, beyond the rain country, he sensed a pressing chakra. He could feel Kurama stirring as it struck a chord inside him. The other Kurama that had been implanted inside his mother was something he recognized. He was momentarily preoccupied and did not hear Nagato's words. Nagato was already making his way back to the cave when he forced himself to stop thinking. Only the eerie sensation continued to rise from the south. Maybe the sensory types could sense it, but Nagato didn't seem to. He was connected to the other fox in a strange way. The force kept rising, and his stomach twisted with concern. With tense muscles that ached to move, he got to his feet. As if sensing the energy of the greatest of the tailed beast, the thunder shook and the sky cracked. When reality returned to him, he gasped for air. Kurama's chakra had diminished and then stabilized at levels that were almost identical. He couldn't shake the worry that was plaguing him because that was his mother. The fox itself was alert and focused inside the seal in which Kurama was imprisoned. Attention! Grabbing ears from the recent explosion. Naruto inquired, so, how many times have you tried to break out? He was standing at the open gate when Kurama turned to face him. Plenty of times, it was harder than it was with you though. Because my seal was designed for your chakra to come through, right? When Kurama did that, it bared its teeth and grinned. I thought it was flaw, but your old man is clever. Your chakra can basically go to zero, but for Kushina, it's a bit different where she can't go near it. There would have been a danger of me breaking out. Silence fell as he reflected on his home, his village, and his mother. You know, I think when I find the old pervy sage, I think it would a nice time to go the Hidden Leaf Village. Huh, thought you wanted to stay with these three? He inquired. If I remember, Nagato said something about Yahiko dying several years after, so we got time. That's if we haven't changed much, sure, but I think they'll be fine for a while. There's something else back at home too. Kurama gave a hum that resembled a low growl. He may not have noticed the difference, of course. Obito Uchiha. Yeah. I'm not sure what I'll do with him yet. Guess I'll just find out when it comes to it. Then maybe, you'll do something about the Uchiha. He massaged his neck. I don't even know where to start. Maybe I'll take my own advice and start small. Naruto knew the conversation with Kurama had stalled when he received an affirmative grunt. With the book he sat down again and continued where he had left off. His favorite parts were still found in a number of the chapters. This time, he did not follow the other three orphans. To give them some privacy, he probably ought to have done that the other day. They headed in the direction of a town that was almost an hour away this time. He didn't provide them with a dossier about another town. He ought to jot down some points for that, I suppose. Hold on. How many points ought he to enter? How many of them? Fuck. Perhaps he should have focused on this instead of having Power read the majority of the book yesterday. He couldn't help but smile when they arrived in the town and remained in one group. Nagato did mention the difficulties they faced, so he assumed he shouldn't be shocked. They were unaffected even by his small gesture of assigning them individual grades. Without him, things worked out fine, except, Nagato turning out the way he did and Yahiko dying. He thought of them as friends and had become somewhat attached to them. He observed from a distance as Konan and Nagato stole a few things while Yahiko loudly complained about the poor quality of the food. Once more, they conspired to rob a vendor. An hour prior to the deadline, they found themselves close to a store located in a structure that sold better quality goods but had more security. He wanted to know how they were going to accomplish this. They were unable to use chakra to increase their strength, speed, and a host of other advantages. After a few months of learning in the academy, he never noticed doing any of that because it was second nature to him. They talked among themselves while they were hanging around the building. As they played with the rope below, he looked down from the roof. They marked the alley with a red can and tied it across its length. They looked down other alleys and followed suit. After a brief conversation, they went back to the store they had located, where Konan went first, followed shortly by Yahiko, and then, for a longer period of time, Nagato. Tiny was left outside. "We're open" sign was posted, and the windows appeared to be reinforced. Naruto leapt down below to get a better look. The cage had been set up by the windows, and he could just make out enough of it. A good view was also provided by the open door. A guard was sitting on a chair near the door, watching them with suspicion. Konan stood in front of the guard after purchasing a popsicle. It appeared that the guard, himself, was more of an employee. When she started talking to him, the guard appeared a little uninterested but not antagonistic. Although his vision was a little blurry, it was still clear that both boys were putting items in their pockets. With her voice piercing from outside the store, the clerk standing by the counter appeared to have alerted the guard. He saw Nagato begin to hurry out the door. Konan tripped and fell to the ground as the guard took a step to grab him. Nagato ran out and made his way through the blocked alley. To follow, Naruto dispatched a shadow clone. The clerk was chasing Yahiko inside, and his face was frantic as he was struck by a thrown brick. Konan was still standing by the door, throwing mud at the clerk behind Yahiko while reaching into her pocket, temporarily blinding him. As they both ran out of the store, Yahiko threw a bag of goods at the red-haired boy. They said, "So how did we do?" "Pretty good," he said, sorting through the stolen supplies. A few things were missing, mostly luxury items. Even a water purifier, which is difficult to replace, was given to them. "What about our grades?" "Good, just good," inquired Yahiko. "Haven't really worked out the grades yet, but what matters most is the teamwork I saw. You guys got more stuff than yesterday when you all were alone." His announcement appeared to embarrass them all. According to Yahiko, Konan was the one who suggested it. "She noticed you said nothing about teaming up." Nagato also mentioned that Yahiko came up with the plan. The girl with the blue hair claimed that Nagato had invented the traps. Naruto gave them a humorous glance. It was a good escape plan, but the traps were unnecessary. What else ought he to teach them now? He had to consider that now, damn it. Nevertheless, he eagerly anticipated the arrival of the pervy sage, so that he could replace his clumsy and ineffective attempts to instruct them.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.